Welcome back to another journey into the vast universe of Mass Effect. Tonight, we're diving deep into one of the galaxy's most fascinating species, the Salarians. Brilliant scientists, master spies, the architects of both salvation and controversy. A race that moves, thinks, and acts at speeds that make the rest of the galaxy seem to be standing still. The Salarians operate on a simple but profound philosophy. A war should be won before it ever begins. Knowledge is power. Information is the ultimate weapon. And in the 2,000 years since they joined the galactic community, they've proven this doctrine time and again. From the highest levels of the Citadel Council to the deepest shadows of covert operations, Salarian influence touches everything. But understanding the Salarians means grappling with uncomfortable questions. What happens when brilliant minds make calculations that treat lives as variables in an equation? When does pragmatism cross the line into something darker? The Salarians gifted the galaxy with incredible technologies, yes, but they also unleashed the genophage, a bioweapon so devastating that an entire species teeters on the edge of extinction because of it. If you've played through the Mass Effect trilogy, you've met Salarians who embody both the best and the most troubling aspects of their species. Mordin Solus, singing Gilbert and Sullivan while wrestling with the ethics of his work on the genophage. Captain Kira, delivering his famous Hold the Line speech on Vermeer. Dalatras Linron, making cold calculations about which species deserve to survive. Each one brilliant. Each one acting according to their own version of the greater good. The Salarians don't fit neatly into categories of heroes or villains. They're scientists who see the universe as a series of problems to be solved, variables to be optimized, outcomes to be predicted and controlled. Their hyperactive metabolisms mean they experience time differently than other species. Where humans might deliberate, Salarians have already run through a dozen scenarios and chosen the most efficient path forward. This speed, this intelligence, this hunger for knowledge and control, it's made them indispensable to galactic civilization. It's also made them dangerous. Because when you're always 10 steps ahead, when you see other species as slow and dim-witted by comparison, it becomes easy to make decisions for them, to manipulate, to guide events from the shadows while believing you're serving the greater good. Tonight, we're going to explore what makes the Salarians tick, from their humid jungle homeworld of Sur Kesh to the shadowy operations of the Special Tasks Group, from their role in ending the Rachni Wars to their creation of the weapon that nearly destroyed the Krogan. We'll examine their unique biology, their labyrinthine government, and the philosophy that drives everything they do. We'll look at how a species with an average lifespan of 40 years has shaped 2 millennia of galactic history. how their emphasis on intelligence gathering and preemptive action fundamentally changed how wars are fought in Citadel space. And we'll grapple with the moral complexity of their choices, decisions made with brilliant minds and cold logic, leaving consequences that echo through generations. So settle in, get comfortable. Let's talk about the Salarians, the species that proved you don't need the longest lifespan, the biggest military, or the most territory to shape the destiny of an entire galaxy. You just need to be smarter than everyone else. And to understand that the real battlefield isn't where fleets clash. It's in the information you possess, the secrets you keep, and the moves you make before your opponents even realize the game has started. Chapter 1. The Speed of Thought. To understand the Salarians, you have to start with their biology, because everything about their culture, their philosophy, their approach to the galaxy stems from the fundamental reality of how their bodies work. The Salarians are creatures of speed, not just physical speed, though they move with surprising quickness for their lanky frames, but mental speed, the speed of thought itself. The Salarian homeworld, Surkesh, is a humid jungle paradise, alternating between vast oceans and land masses covered in lush vegetation. The planet enjoys a biodiversity that rivals Earth's ancient rainforests. Dangerous flora and fauna lurk in every shadow. The environment shaped the Salarians in profound ways. It taught them to be observant, to think quickly, to see patterns and threats before they fully emerged. To survive on Surkesh meant developing a mind that could process information faster than the predators hunting you. The Salarians evolved as amphibians, warm-blooded but with the skin texture and coloring that betrays their aquatic ancestry. They're tall and thin, with elongated bodies well-suited to their high metabolism. Their skeletons contain more cartilage than bone compared to species like humans, giving them surprising flexibility. Salarian heads are distinctive, long and narrow, with a pair of horns protruding from the top of their skulls. Their eyes are large and oval, with thin membranes instead of eyelids. The pupils are wide slits, oriented horizontally, and they blink upward rather than down. Their skin varies in color from bright reds and greens to more common shades of blue or gray. Their blood runs greenish. Everything about their physiology screams alien when you stand next to them, but it's what you can't see that truly sets them apart. The Salarian metabolism is hyperactive. Imagine your heart beating twice as fast as normal, your thoughts racing through your brain at double speed, your entire body running like an engine redlined constantly. That's what it's like to be Salarian. They process information, make decisions, and execute plans faster than almost any other sentient species in the galaxy. What takes a human an hour to think through, a Salarian completes in minutes. This speed comes with trade-offs. Salarians need very little sleep, just 1 hour per Earth day. Their minds and bodies simply don't require the downtime other species do. But the price for this is steep. The average Salarian lifespan is only about 40 years. A Salarian over 40 is a rarity. An elderly Salarian pushing 50 is almost unheard of. They burn bright and fast, packing what would be a normal lifespan's worth of thinking and working into half the time. Think about what that means. A Salarian scientist reaches the peak of their intellectual powers in their 20s. They have maybe 15, 20 years of prime research time before age starts to catch up with them. Every moment matters. Every hour counts. There's no time to waste on inefficiency or slow deliberation. This creates a culture where speed isn't just valued, it's necessary. It's survival. The Salarians possess photographic memories. They rarely forget a fact or figure once they've encountered it. This isn't quite perfect recall, the way an AI might have, but it's close. A Salarian can meet thousands of relatives across their extended clan networks and remember every name, every face, every connection. They can reference obscure scientific papers from decades ago without consulting notes. Their brains are optimized for information storage and rapid retrieval. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Salarians don't just think fast. They think differently. Non-linear thinking, it's called in the codex entries. While humans tend to approach problems sequentially, step by step, Salarians see multiple paths simultaneously. They make intuitive leaps that seem to skip steps entirely. To a human observer, a Salarian's thought process can seem scattered or random, but there's method to it. They're exploring possibility spaces, running mental simulations, connecting disparate pieces of information in ways that slower minds simply can't match. This manifests as an extraordinary aptitude for research and espionage. Salarians excel at seeing patterns in chaos, at connecting dots that others miss, at asking the questions that lead to breakthrough discoveries. They're constantly experimenting, constantly inventing, constantly pushing the boundaries of what's known. And it's generally accepted throughout the galaxy that Salarians always know more than they're letting on. Because while you're still processing the situation, they've already analyzed it, found the angles, and decided how to exploit it. Their reproductive biology is equally unique and has profound effects on their society. Salarians are haplodiploid egg layers. Unfertilized eggs produce males. Fertilized eggs produce females. Once a year, a female Salarian lays a clutch of dozens of eggs. But here's the critical detail. Social rules prevent all but a fraction from being fertilized. As a result, 90% of the Salarian species is male. This isn't accidental. It's population control built into their culture. On Surkesh, with its limited habitable space and dangerous environment, uncontrolled population growth would have been catastrophic. So the ancient Salarians developed complex breeding rules that kept their numbers sustainable. These rules evolved into the elaborate clan negotiations and political considerations that govern reproduction today. Salarians have no concept of romantic love as other species understand it. No sex drive in the traditional sense. Morden Solis, the brilliant scientist who became one of Commander Shepard's most trusted companions, explained it plainly. Salarian reproduction isn't hormone-based. It's purely biological necessity. Male-female relationships are rare due to the scarcity of females, and when they do exist, they're more akin to human friendship than romance. Sexuality is strictly for reproduction. Who gets to fertilize which eggs is determined by ancient social codes. These codes are taken with absolute seriousness. Fertilization occurs only after months, sometimes years of negotiation between clans. It's done for purposes of political and dynastic alliance. No Salarian would imagine defying this code. To do so would be to attack the very foundation of their society. There's a solemn ritual around hatching. The clan matriarch, the Dalatras, isolates herself with the eggs. When they hatch, the young Salarian psychologically imprint on her. They defer to her wishes for the rest of their lives. This imprinting is profound and lifelong. If daughters are being hatched, the Dalatrases of both the mother and father's clans are present. This ensures the offspring have equal loyalty to both families, creating the dynastic and political unity that was the whole point of the breeding negotiation in the first place. This imprinting extends beyond family. Salarians tend to defer to those they knew in their youth, their mentors, their early teachers, the authority figures who shaped them during their formative years. It creates a society where experience and seniority carry enormous weight, where the older generation, despite their declining numbers, maintains influence over the younger through psychological bonds that go deeper than mere respect. Understanding Salarian biology is essential to understanding everything else about them. Their speed shapes their culture. Their short lives create urgency. Their photographic memories make them natural scholars and spies. Their reproductive system creates a society dominated by political calculation and clan loyalty. And their psychological imprinting means that early influences echo through entire lifetimes. When you meet a Salarian, you're not just meeting an individual. You're meeting the product of a biology that demands speed, rewards intelligence, and operates on timescales that make them experience the universe differently than almost any other species. They think fast, they talk fast, and to them, the rest of the galaxy really does seem sluggish and dull-witted. This is both their greatest strength and their deepest flaw. Because when you think that quickly, when you see other species as slow by comparison, it becomes easy to make decisions for them, to guide events because you've already seen how they'll unfold, to act preemptively because waiting for slower minds to catch up feels like torture. The Salarians were shaped by Sirkesh's jungles, by the need to think faster than the predator stalking you, by the reality of a short life that had to accomplish everything quickly or not at all. They brought that mentality with them to the stars, and the galaxy would never be the same. Chapter 2. A Government of Clans. The Salarian Union isn't like other galactic governments. It's not a democracy like the Systems Alliance, not a meritocracy like the Turians, not a republic with clear chains of command and elected officials. The Salarian Union is a labyrinthine web of matrilineal bloodlines, with political alliances formed through the same breeding negotiations that determine who gets to reproduce in the first place. In many ways, it functions like the noble families of Earth's medieval Europe. Power flows through bloodlines. Territory equals influence. Marriages, or rather breeding contracts in this case, are diplomatic tools as much as biological necessities. But multiply that complexity by the fact that Salarians have photographic memories, can track thousands of relatives simultaneously, and live in a culture where clan loyalty is literally imprinted into their psychology at birth. The government structure is built in layers. Fiefdoms, baronies, duchies, planets, and marches. These are human translations. The original Salarian terms are unpronounceable to most species. Each area is ruled by a single Dalatras, the matriarchal head of household. Each represents an increasing amount of territory and prestige within the Salarian political web. The first circle of a Salarian's clan comprises about 100 members: parents, siblings, uncles, aunts, and cousins. These are the people you know intimately, the ones you trust absolutely. Salarian loyalty is greatest to this first circle. The second circle expands to over 1,000 members, second cousins and more distant relatives. By the time you reach the fourth or fifth circle, you're talking about millions of individuals, all connected by blood, all part of the same vast clan network. And a Salarian, with their photographic memory, can recognize every single one. This creates a society where clan identity is everything, where your family name determines your opportunities, your alliances, your entire place in the social order, and where the Dalatrases, the female leaders who control reproduction and therefore the creation of new alliances, wield enormous power. The rare Salarian females are cloistered on their worlds out of tradition and respect. They're too valuable, too politically important to risk in the wider galaxy. Powerful Dalatrases are dynasts and political kingpins. They determine the political course of entire regions through shrewd negotiation, through carefully calculated breeding contracts, through the patient accumulation of favors and alliances that can take decades to fully mature. Male Salarians, by contrast, rise to positions of authority in business, academia, and the military. They're the public face of Salarian society. The scientists, the soldiers, the entrepreneurs. But they rarely have any input on actual politics. The real power sits with the Dalatrases, operating from Surkesh and the handful of core Salarian worlds, pulling strings through bloodline and breeding contract. There are exceptions. Councillor Valerne, the Salarian representative on the Citadel Council, is male. A long line of Salarian councillors have been male, typically drawn from the Special Tasks Group. But even they operate with the understanding that the Dalatrases back home are the ones truly setting policy. The councillor is a voice. The Dalatrases are the will behind it. The Union is largely dominated by the 10 most influential clans, collectively known as the Drinum Vada. Membership in this exclusive group isn't permanent. Clan influence ebbs and flows with changes in leadership, with successful or failed breeding alliances, with how well your clan members perform in academia or business or military service. It's a constantly shifting landscape of power, and the Dalatrases are master navigators of its currents. This might sound impossibly complex, and it is, but remember, Salarians have perfect memory and think faster than other species. What seems like Byzantine political maneuvering to an outsider is just the normal operation of society to them. They track it all effortlessly. They see the connections, understand the implications of each breeding contract, know how clan fortunes are shifting before the changes become obvious. Salarian names reflect this complexity. A full name includes, in order, the name of their homeworld, nation, city, district, clan name, and given name. A Salarian named Gorot to Heranon Maldinist Godinost Ledra would typically be called either by his clan name, Inost, or his given name, Ledra. The full name is used only in formal circumstances, but every Salarian knows the full name of everyone important in their circles. They have to, because knowing someone's full name tells you everything about their place in society. This system has governed the Salarians since before they discovered space travel. It was already ancient when they first colonized other worlds, and when they discovered the Citadel, just decades after the Asari, they brought this system with them to the galactic stage. The Salarians became one of the founding species of the Citadel Council around 500 BCE. They opened diplomatic relations with the Asari immediately and enthusiastically. Here was another species with similar lifespans to the Asari, which meant long-term stability. Another species that valued intelligence and diplomacy. The partnership formed quickly. In a gesture of trust during those early days, the Salarians opened the records of one of their intelligence services, the League of One. This elite group of assassins and spies had operated in the shadows for centuries, protecting the Union from threats before they could fully materialize. The Salarians thought sharing this information would demonstrate transparency, would show the Asari they could be trusted. It backfired spectacularly. With their identities exposed, League of One members found themselves in danger from old enemies throughout the galaxy. The League responded the only way they knew how. They went rogue. The entire Union inner cabinet was slaughtered in what must have been a breathtakingly efficient series of assassinations. Then the League disappeared. The Special Tasks Group, the STG, was dispatched to hunt them down. When the first team didn't return, the STG sent 10 of its brightest operators with broad discretionary powers. Only 2 came back. They reported no evidence of the League. No further incidents occurred. The League of One was declared eliminated. But there were rumors, whispers. Some declassified documents suggest there may have been a 13th member who eluded even the STG. This early lesson taught the Salarians something valuable about working with other species. Transparency has limits. Some secrets must remain secret. The STG, learning from the League of One disaster, became the most compartmentalized, need-to-know intelligence organization in the galaxy. Even today, most STG operations are known only through code names. The Ever-Alert, who kept armies at bay with hidden facts. The Silent Step, so successful they once defeated a nation with a single shot. The Salarian military itself is relatively small, a volunteer force focused on maneuver warfare. What differentiates them isn't equipment or doctrine, but intelligence services and rules of engagement. The Salarians believe, fundamentally, that a war should be won before it begins. This isn't empty philosophy, it's how they operate. Well before fighting breaks out, Salarians possess complete knowledge of their enemies' positions, intentions, and timetable. Their intelligence network is unmatched. By the time the shooting starts, they've already undermined enemy morale, sabotaged critical infrastructure, turned key personnel, and arranged for convenient accidents to befall enemy leadership. The actual military conflict is just mopping up. This creates a very particular approach to warfare. In every war the Salarians have fought, they struck first and without warning. The idea of declaring war before prosecuting it strikes them as insane. Why give the enemy time to prepare? Why sacrifice the element of surprise? To know an enemy plans to attack and let it happen is folly in Salarian thinking. They find human moral concepts like
"do not fire until fired upon" incredibly naive. To a Salarian, if you know someone is going to hit you, you hit them first, hard, before they even raise their fist. It's not treachery, it's intelligence properly applied. In defensive wars, they execute devastating preemptive strikes hours before the enemy's own attacks would have landed. They've intercepted the communications, cracked the codes, know the exact timing. So they hit first. In offensive wars, there's never an official declaration before the attack begins. The first the enemy knows about the war is when their assets start exploding. This philosophy extends to internal politics as well. The STG doesn't just monitor external threats. They monitor developing situations within Citadel space. Political movements that might destabilize friendly governments. Criminal organizations growing too powerful. Extremist groups gaining traction. The STG takes necessary action, usually without the shackles of traditional laws and procedures. This might be as simple as information gathering, or as complex as ensuring a conveniently unstable political situation stays that way. Creating controlled chaos to prevent worse chaos. It's manipulative, yes. Some would call it cynical. But to the Salarians, it's just good government. Managing threats before they require military intervention. Spending credits on intelligence instead of soldiers. Using information as a weapon instead of dreadnoughts. Biotics are virtually unknown in the Salarian military. Any Salarian who manifests biotic abilities is considered too valuable to use as cannon fodder. They're assigned to intelligence services instead, where their unique capabilities can be leveraged with precision rather than wasted in mass combat. The Salarians know they're small fish in a universe full of sharks. Their economy is the smallest of the three council races. Their military couldn't stand toe-to-toe with the Turian fleets, or even the Systems Alliance in a prolonged conventional war. So they've cultivated strong alliances, particularly with the Turians. The relationship between Salarians and Turians was rocky at first. The Turians entered galactic civilization by helping end the Krogan rebellions, a situation the Salarians had created through their uplift program. There was tension, resentment. But both species recognized they needed each other. Turians provide muscle. Salarians provide intelligence. Together, they've become the backbone of Citadel military power. Any potential enemy knows that attacking Salarian space means dealing with Turian intervention, and vice versa. It's a partnership that's kept the peace for centuries. The Salarians take pains to keep this relationship strong. They share intelligence freely, well, mostly freely, with Turian military command. They coordinate operations. And when conflicts arise, they negotiate them carefully, because losing Turian support would leave the Union vulnerable. This is the Salarian government.
A matriarchal web of clans where bloodline determines everything, where intelligence is the primary weapon, where preemptive action is doctrine, where short lives create urgency, and photographic memories create perfect institutional knowledge. It's not a system that could work for humans, or Turians, or Asari, but for the Salarians, who think fast and remember everything. It's been stable for millennia, and that stability, that long-term planning driven by the Dolatrases, who think in terms of generations, despite individual Salarians' short lifespans, has made them indispensable to galactic civilization. They're the ones who see problems coming decades out, who lay groundwork for operations that won't bear fruit until long after the current generation has died, who accumulate information patiently, bit by bit, until they have complete pictures that others missed. The Salarians govern differently because they are different, and the galaxy has learned, sometimes painfully, that underestimating the amphibian scientists from Surkesh is a mistake you only make once. Chapter 3. The STG. If you want to understand Salarian power, you have to understand the Special Tasks Group. The STG is where Salarian philosophy becomes action, where intelligence gathering becomes surgical intervention, where the doctrine of winning wars before they begin is put into practice every single day, across the galaxy, in operations that most people will never hear about. The STG is Salarian Espionage and Special Operations, but calling it that doesn't really capture what it is. It's not like human intelligence agencies, not like CIA or MI6 or Alliance Intelligence. Those organizations gather information and occasionally run operations. The STG is different. It's proactive, aggressive, interventionist in ways that would make even the most hawkish human officials uncomfortable. STG operators work in independent cells, small teams with broad operational latitude. They perform counterterrorism, infiltration, reconnaissance, assassination, and sabotage. But the key word is independent. Each cell operates with minimal oversight, responding to developing situations as they see fit. The STG trusts its operatives to understand the larger strategic picture and make decisions accordingly. This requires incredible agents, and the recruitment process is brutal. Salarians selected for STG consideration are already the best of the best. Scientists, soldiers, analysts who've proven themselves exceptional in their fields. Then they're put through training that would break most humans. Not just physical conditioning, though that's part of it, but mental training. Learning to think 3 steps ahead of an opponent who's already thinking 2 steps ahead. To operate in enemy territory with 0 support. To improvise, adapt, and overcome when plans fall apart, which they always do. The STG places enormous emphasis on quick thinking and resourcefulness, because unlike other special forces that can Call for backup, that have extensive support networks and logistics chains, STG operatives work alone or in tiny teams, often in the terminus systems, far from any friendly support. They're expected to accomplish their missions on shoestring resources, to be brutally practical, to do whatever it takes to succeed, regardless of the cost to others or themselves. This creates a particular personality type. STG operatives are among the most feared individuals in the galaxy. Clear-eyed, remorseless, utterly devoted to the mission. They'll sacrifice civilians if necessary. They'll burn intelligence assets. They'll trigger conflicts, topple governments, assassinate key figures, whatever advances Salarian interests. But they're not mindless killers or chaos agents. They're thinking constantly, weighing consequences, choosing the least bad option when all options are terrible. Morden Solace, perhaps the most famous STG operative players meet, embodies this. He's affable, friendly even, sings Gilbert and Sullivan, but when the mission requires it, he kills without hesitation, and he justifies it with consequentialist logic. The ends justify the means. Save more lives than you take. Calculate the outcome and optimize for the greater good. The effectiveness of the STG during the Krogan rebellions is what provided the template for the Council to establish the Spectre program immediately afterward. Spectres are modeled on STG operatives, elite agents given broad discretionary powers to handle situations before they explode into crises. The key difference is that Spectres work for the Council directly and can be drawn from any species. But the operational philosophy, the emphasis on preemptive action and minimal oversight, that's pure Salarian thinking. Compared to Spectres, STG units actually have advantages. Better funding, for one. Spectres have to buy their own weapons and equipment. STG operatives are supplied with whatever they need. Cutting-edge technology, experimental weapons, access to the full resources of the Salarian Union's research and development networks. An STG operative needing specialized tech for a mission gets it. No questions asked. The records of STG missions are sealed. Even the greatest agents are known only by code names, the Ever Alert, the Silent Step. These legendary figures accomplished things that shaped galactic history, but their real names died with them. This secrecy serves multiple purposes. It protects the operatives and their families from retaliation. It prevents enemies from studying STG methods in detail. And it creates a mystique that amplifies the psychological impact of the organization. Knowing the STG exists, knowing they're operating somewhere in the shadows, affects how people behave. Criminal organizations think twice. Extremist movements wonder if their leadership has been infiltrated. Hostile governments assume their communications are compromised. The uncertainty itself is a weapon. The STG doesn't have to be everywhere if everyone thinks they might be. One of the earliest known STG operations was hunting down the Rogue League of One shortly after the Council's formation. 10 operators went in. 2 came back. They reported no evidence of the League, and no further incidents occurred. The operation was considered a success, but note what that means. The STG considers an 80% casualty rate acceptable if the mission is accomplished. That's the level of commitment expected. During the events of Mass Effect, Commander Shepard encounters STG elements multiple times. The first significant contact is on Vermeer. Captain Kira's STG 3rd Infiltration Regiment
had been deployed to investigate reports of a Salarian science team gone missing. What they found was Saren's base, a hidden facility producing an army of indoctrinated soldiers and conducting horrible experiments on the very scientists the STG had been sent to find. Kira's forces were isolated, outnumbered, cut off from support. They'd managed to send one message to the council, but it had been empty by the time it arrived. Garbled by interference or sabotage, the STG regiment was on its own, deep in enemy territory, facing forces that vastly outnumbered them. This is where you see what the STG really is. Kira doesn't retreat, doesn't call for extraction. He prepares to hold the line. When Commander Shepard arrives, Kira's already planning a diversionary assault to give Shepard a shot at destroying the base. It's a near-suicide mission. The STG operators know this, but they don't hesitate. Kira's speech before the assault has become legendary. "You all know the mission and what is at stake. I have come to trust each of you with my life, but I have also heard murmurs of discontent. I share your concerns. These are trying times, but you are soldiers of the Salarian Special Tasks Group. You will adapt and overcome. Fear the enemy? No. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. We will face our fear. We will permit it to pass over us and through us. Hold the line. Stay with me. If you find yourself alone, riding in green fields with the sun on your face, do not be troubled, for you are in Elysium, and you're already dead." That speech encapsulates STG philosophy. Acknowledge the fear, acknowledge the odds, then do the mission anyway, because that's what the job requires. Most of Kira's regiment dies on Vermeer, but they accomplish their mission. They hold the line long enough for Shepard to destroy Saren's facility, and Kira, if you make the right choices, survives to fight another day. He's promoted to Major, receives the prestigious Star of Sir Cash, and continues serving with distinction. The STG facility on Sir Cash reveals another aspect of their operations. Research into the genophage, yes, but also investigations into uplifting other species. Varan, the vicious predators of Tuchanka. Vorcha, the short-lived hyper-adaptive species that infest the seedier parts of the galaxy. And Yog, the pre-spaceflight species from Parnack that's considered too dangerous for Council contact. The STG is always looking ahead, always considering what tools might be needed for future conflicts. If a species shows potential for military application, the STG studies them, determines if and how they could be uplifted, constants the risks and benefits, runs simulations of what would happen if that species joined galactic civilization. This isn't pure research. It's strategic planning decades or centuries out. The Salarians uplifted the Krogan to fight the Rachni. That worked spectacularly well, until it didn't. The STG learned from that. They're more cautious now, but they're still looking, still evaluating, still preparing options for conflicts that haven't even started yet. After the Krogan rebellions, the STG sabotaged the shroud on Tuchanka.
The shroud is a massive array of towers that the Salarians built during the uplift, designed to stabilize Tuchanka's atmosphere. It's one of the Salarians' greatest engineering achievements, and the STG quietly rigged it to fail if anyone ever tried to use it to disperse a genophage cure. Think about what that means. The STG was planning for the possibility of a genophage cure decades, maybe centuries, before any cure was even theoretically possible. They looked ahead to a future where someone might develop a cure, calculated that it would probably be released through the shroud, since that's the only infrastructure capable of planetary-scale atmospheric dispersal on Tuchanka, and sabotaged it preemptively. That's the STG mind at work, thinking generations ahead, preparing for contingencies that seem impossible, making sure that even if everything goes wrong, even if the inconceivable happens, they have a backup plan already in place. During the Reaper War, when Commander Shepard needs Krogan support to retake Earth, this sabotage becomes a critical plot point. Morden Solace, the former STG operative who helped modify the genophage, is the one who discovers the sabotage. He can override it, but doing so requires him to sacrifice himself. He takes the elevator up the Shroud Tower, fixing the sabotage as he goes, staying behind to ensure the cure disperses properly, even as the tower collapses around him. His last words, broadcast over comm, are characteristically Salarian. Had to be me. Someone else might have gotten it wrong. It's brilliant and heartbreaking, and perfectly encapsulates what the STG is. Absolute confidence in their own abilities, absolute commitment to the mission, and underneath it, a very Salarian form of honor. The job required someone with his specific knowledge and skills, so it had to be him. Simple logic, simple math. One life to save a species. The STG operates throughout the galaxy at all times. At any given moment, a dozen cells are working covertly in the terminus systems, sowing dissent among pirate factions, ensuring that criminal organizations stay fragmented and fighting each other instead of organizing into something more dangerous. Civilian analysts note how troublesome hinge point individuals in the terminus frequently meet unexpected deaths. The STG doesn't advertise these operations. They don't need credit. Results are what matter. A warlord who was uniting disparate gangs into a unified force suddenly dies in a shuttle accident. A radical movement loses momentum when its charismatic leader is exposed in a scandal. A weapons shipment disappears en route, preventing an escalation that would have required military intervention. Each of these could be random chance, or they could be the STG, operating in the shadows, keeping chaos manageable. This interventionist approach makes the STG controversial. Some see them as necessary guardians, doing the dirty work that keeps civilizations safe.
Others view them as arrogant manipulators who treat galactic civilization like their personal chessboard. Both perspectives have merit. The STG absolutely manipulates events. They operate outside normal legal constraints. They make decisions that affect billions without consulting those billions. But they also prevent wars, stop genocides before they start, neutralize threats that would otherwise require fleet-scale military responses. How many lives has the STG saved through preemptive action? How many conflicts never happened because the STG removed the key figures before tensions could explode? There's no way to count prevented disasters. No memorial for the war that never was. So the STG's true value is always going to be debatable. What's not debatable is their effectiveness. The STG is arguably the most successful intelligence organization in Citadel space. They predicted the first contact war between humans and Turians before either species knew the other existed, based purely on expansion patterns. They maintained deep cover agents in the Shadow Brokers organization for decades. They were the first to confirm Reaper existence after the Battle of the Citadel, when most of the galaxy still thought Sovereign was just a Geth flagship. STG operatives are trained to blend in, to adapt to any environment. A Salarian in STG can pass as a civilian scientist, as a tourist, as a merchant. They learn other species' body language, speech patterns, cultural expectations. They become invisible by becoming unremarkable. The Salarian scanning agricultural samples at the market? Probably just a researcher. Or maybe an STG operative mapping security patterns and identifying potential assets. The compartmentalization within the STG is extreme. Cells don't know what other cells are doing. Sometimes cells working in the same region don't even know about each other. Information is shared strictly on a need-to-know basis. This protects operations if an agent is captured or turned, but it also means that sometimes STG cells work at cross purposes, each pursuing objectives that conflict with operations they don't know about. This happened during the Krogan rebellions. Multiple STG teams were pursuing different strategies simultaneously, some working to contain Krogan expansion, others sabotaging Krogan infrastructure, still others trying to identify Krogan leadership that could be reasoned with. The left hand genuinely didn't know what the right hand was doing. But from a strategic perspective, this actually helped. The Krogan never knew which approach was the real Salarian strategy, because the Salarians were executing all possible approaches simultaneously. The STG also engages in what they call long-term asset development. This is the patient cultivation of agents in enemy organizations. It might take years. A Salarian operative infiltrates a target organization at a low level, proves themselves valuable, slowly rises through the ranks, all the while sending information back to the STG. By the time they're in a position to do real damage or acquire critical intelligence, they've been embedded so long that no one suspects them. This requires incredible dedication. An STG operative might spend their entire career, their entire short life, in deep cover, never breaking character,
never going home, knowing that they'll probably die in place, their mission incomplete, their sacrifices never publicly acknowledged. But their work might create opportunities that other operators exploit decades later. They're planting seeds they'll never see grow, but someone will harvest the crop. The STG maintains extensive files on every significant individual in Citadel space. Political leaders, certainly, but also scientists, business executives, military officers, cultural figures, anyone with influence. The files contain everything: family connections, personal habits, weaknesses, pressure points. If the STG needs leverage on someone, they have it. If they need to predict how someone will react to a situation, they have psychological profiles detailed enough to make accurate assessments. This surveillance state would be horrifying if it were directed inward at Salarian citizens, but it's not. The STG focuses outward. They monitor threats to the Union and to galactic stability generally. Internally, Salarian society is remarkably free. There's no thought police, no restrictions on speech or assembly. The Dalatrases rule through political maneuvering, not oppression. The STG exists to protect that freedom by ensuring external threats never get close enough to threaten it. During Mass Effect 3, the STG plays a critical role in the war effort. They're the ones who extract Primarch Victus from Palaven during the initial Reaper assault. They coordinate intelligence sharing between all allied species. They run infiltration operations on Reaper-controlled worlds, gathering data on Reaper tactics and capabilities. And they maintain the resistance network on Tuchanka when the Krogan join the fight. Major Kirahi, if he survived Vermeer, becomes a key liaison between Salarian forces and Shepard's coalition. He represents the best of what the STG can be. Honor-bound, willing to sacrifice, but also pragmatic enough to understand when ideology has to bend to necessity. He doesn't agree with curing the genophage. His Dalatris certainly doesn't. But he recognizes that the Krogan are needed, that defeating the Reapers requires setting aside old grudges, and he helps make it happen. The STG isn't monolithic. Individual operatives have their own moral codes, their own lines they won't cross. Mordin Salas wrestled with the ethics of the genophage modification for years. He defended it intellectually, but emotionally, he was haunted. Other STG operatives we meet show similar complexity. They're not automatons. They're individuals making impossible choices in service of what they believe is the greater good. But the organization itself is cold, calculating. It makes decisions based on probability and strategic value. Individual lives are variables in equations. Species are resources to be managed or threats to be neutralized. This calculus has saved the galaxy multiple times. It's also created humanitarian disasters like the genophage. The STG is proof that you can be brilliant and ethical according to your own logic, while still doing terrible things. The legacy of the STG is complicated. They've prevented countless conflicts, saved millions of lives through early intervention, provided the intelligence that allowed Citadel forces to win wars with minimal casualties. They've also manipulated governments, assassinated inconvenient individuals, and maintained a system where Krogans suffer for the crimes of their ancestors centuries ago. Ask a Salarian about the STG, and they'll speak with pride. These are the defenders of the Union, the silent guardians who keep civilization safe. Ask a Krogan, and you'll get a different answer. The STG is the embodiment of Salarian arrogance, the proof that these amphibian scientists think they have the right to decide which species live and which die. Both perspectives are true. The STG represents Salarian philosophy in its purest form. Intelligence as the ultimate weapon, preemptive action as doctrine, the belief that preventing war justifies almost any action. They're the logical endpoint of a species that thinks faster than everyone else and has concluded that waiting for slower minds to catch up is a luxury they can't afford. In the end, the Special Tasks Group is what happens when brilliant minds are given the mission to protect their civilization at any cost. They'll do it efficiently, effectively, with minimal resources and maximum impact. They'll make the hard choices that others shy away from, and they'll live, briefly, with the consequences of those choices, before burning out, like all Salarians do, and being replaced by the next generation, ready to continue the mission. Chapter 4: The Rachni Wars and the Krogan Solution. To understand why the Salarians created the genophage, you have to understand the Rachni Wars. And to understand the Rachni Wars, you have to understand what the Rachni were. Not mindless monsters, not simple predators, but a sophisticated, space-faring civilization that the galaxy encountered in the worst possible way. The Rachni are insectoid creatures, like ants or termites, but evolved to sentience and directed by queens with psionic abilities. The workers, soldiers, and ships are all extensions of the queen's will. One mind, controlling thousands of bodies. But that mind is intelligent, complex, capable of philosophy and art alongside war and conquest. The Rachni that attacked Citadel space weren't acting on instinct. They were following a strategy that the galaxy didn't understand and couldn't counter. The Rachni Wars began around 1 CE. The exact date is uncertain because it took years for the Citadel Council to recognize they were facing a unified threat rather than isolated pirate attacks. The Rachni emerged from the galactic frontier, from the uncharted relay network beyond explored space. They came in swarms, ships that looked more like living organisms than manufactured vessels, and they were ferociously aggressive. The initial encounters were disasters for Citadel forces. Asari and Salarian ships were built for peacekeeping and exploration. They weren't designed for the kind of brutal, close-quarters combat the Rachni specialized in. Rachni vessels would close to boarding range, breach enemy hulls, and send worker swarms pouring through. The defenders would be overwhelmed by sheer numbers, by creatures that felt no fear and accepted casualties that would break any traditional military force. Traditional tactics didn't work. The Rachni didn't have supply lines to cut. Every ship was partially self-sufficient, growing food from organic matter, recycling resources. They didn't have command structures to decapitate. Kill the entire crew of a ship and the queen would just hatch more. And they reproduced fast, horrifically fast. A single Rachni queen could lay hundreds of eggs. Those eggs hatched in weeks. Within months, you had a new generation of soldiers ready for combat. The Asari and Salarians fought bravely, but they were losing. Slowly, steadily, inevitably. The Rachni took system after system, established breeding grounds on conquered worlds. Each victory gave them more resources, more territory, more population. They weren't just winning battles, they were winning the population war. And everyone knew that if this continued, Citadel space would eventually be overrun. The Council was desperate. They needed a military force that could match Rachni numbers and aggression. They needed soldiers who could fight in the close-quarters hell of boarding actions, who could match Rachni ferocity, who could survive on hostile worlds and deny the Rachni their breeding grounds. They needed the impossible. The Salarians found it on Tuchanka. The Krogan were pre-spaceflight when the Salarians discovered them. They'd achieved nuclear weapons and promptly used them to nearly render their own world uninhabitable. Tuchanka was a wasteland, constant warfare between clans, predators that could kill anything short of an armored vehicle, resources scarce enough that violence was the primary means of survival, and the Krogan thrived in it. Krogan biology is extraordinary. They're massive, heavily armored with thick hides and redundant organs. They can survive injuries that would kill most species. Their regeneration is remarkable, healing from wounds in hours that would take other species weeks. They can adapt to almost any environment. Radioactive wastelands? No problem. Toxic atmospheres? They'll manage. Extreme temperatures? They barely notice. But most importantly, Krogan reproduce prolifically. A female Krogan can have clutches of up to 1,000 eggs. Their natural birth rate is phenomenal. Combined with their toughness and their culture of violence, the Krogan were the perfect weapon against the Rachni. They just needed spaceflight. The Salarians provided it. This was the first uplift. The first time a Citadel species gave spacefaring technology to a pre-industrial civilization. It wasn't done lightly. The Salarians studied Krogan culture for years before making contact. They ran simulations, calculated probabilities, and concluded that the risk was acceptable given the alternative of losing the war entirely. The uplift happened quickly. Too quickly in hindsight. The Salarians gave the Krogan everything: starship designs, weapons technology, medical advances, manufacturing techniques. They educated Krogan scientists and engineers. They integrated Krogan warriors into military units. And they pointed them at the Rachni. The Krogan were devastating. They fought with a ferocity that matched and exceeded the Rachni's. They could board Rachni vessels and clear them, deck by deck, in close-quarters combat that would have annihilated Asari or Salarian Marines. They could establish beachheads on Rachni-held worlds and survive conditions that would kill other species. Their numbers grew rapidly, matching the Rachni's own reproduction rate. Most critically, the Krogan could deny the Rachni their breeding worlds. They'd locate Rachni colonies, land in force, and exterminate every egg, every worker, every trace of Rachni presence. Then they'd fortify the planet and hold it against counterattack. The Rachni suddenly found themselves losing territory. Their expansion not just halted, but reversed. The war turned, slowly at first, then rapidly. The Krogan were winning. They developed a reputation as the galaxy's finest warriors, fearless, relentless, capable of victories that seemed impossible. They drove the Rachni back system by system. The Queen-directed ships fled before Krogan fleets. Within decades, the Rachni presence in Citadel space was eliminated. The Krogan pursued them. This wasn't enough to defend Citadel space. The Rachni had to be destroyed completely, eliminated so thoroughly they could never threaten the galaxy again. The Krogan tracked them to their homeworld, and there, in one of the most brutal campaigns in galactic history, the Krogan committed genocide. The Rachni were wiped out, or so everyone believed. The queens were killed, the breeding world sterilized, the genetic archives destroyed. The Krogan made sure nothing survived, and the galaxy breathed a sigh of relief. The existential threat was ended. The Krogan were heroes, saviors of Citadel civilization. They were given gifts of planets, territory to colonize and call their own. The Council thought this was appropriate, a reward for their service, a way to keep the Krogan integrated into galactic society, give them space to grow, and they'd become productive members of the community. It didn't work out that way. The Krogan population exploded. Remember, they can have clutches of up to 1,000 eggs. On their radioactive wasteland homeworld, the environment kept their numbers in check. Most offspring died, but on pleasant garden worlds with modern medicine, suddenly those 1,000-egg clutches were surviving. The Krogan population grew exponentially, and the Krogan culture hadn't changed. They were still fundamentally a warrior society, built on clan loyalty and blood feuds, violent competition for status and resources. On Tuchanka, this was sustainable because resources were so scarce. But on wealthy garden worlds, the violence continued without the environmental checks that had previously limited it. The Krogan began expanding beyond their granted territories. They'd colonize new worlds without asking permission. They'd take systems by force if diplomacy failed. When the Council tried to set limits, the Krogan ignored them. What was the Council going to do? The Asari and Salarians didn't have the military power to enforce restrictions, and the Krogan knew it. The Krogan rebellions began around 700 CE, not as a single unified conflict, but as a spreading pattern of Krogan aggression. Colonies seized, worlds claimed, Citadel authority challenged and ignored. The species that had saved the galaxy was now threatening to conquer it. The Council was in a terrible position. The Krogan were right about one thing. In a conventional war, they'd win. They had the numbers, the toughness, the military experience from the Rachni Wars. Citadel forces couldn't match them in direct combat. So the Salarians looked for another solution. Something that wouldn't require defeating the Krogan in battle. They found it in the Krogan's greatest strength, their reproduction. Chapter 5. The Genophage. The genophage is one of the most controversial weapons ever deployed in galactic history. It's a biological weapon, a genetic modification that targets fertility. But calling it that doesn't capture what it really is. The genophage is sophisticated, elegant in a terrible way, and it represents Salarian thinking at both its most brilliant and most morally questionable. The Salarians didn't create it hastily. The genophage was developed over decades by their finest genetic engineers. It had to be. The Krogan biology is extraordinarily robust. Their immune systems can handle almost anything. Their regeneration repairs genetic damage. Creating a bioweapon that could affect them at all required understanding Krogan genetics at a level that even the Krogan themselves didn't possess. The genophage doesn't kill. That's crucial to understanding it. It doesn't sterilize completely. It doesn't cause pain or suffering in the infected individuals. What it does is modify the genome to drastically reduce viable pregnancies. Remember those clutches of 1,000 eggs? After the genophage, only 1 or 2 might be viable. The rest are stillborn. The numbers are horrific. A conception success rate of roughly 1 in 1,000. A species that evolved to have massive clutches, to overwhelm environmental dangers with sheer reproductive numbers, suddenly finding that almost every pregnancy ends in stillbirth, that every female knows she'll hold hundreds of dead children for every one that survives. The psychological impact is catastrophic. Krogan culture built itself around the clan, around children and legacy and future generations. Suddenly, there is no future, no next generation to speak of. Families that would have had dozens of children producing maybe 1, maybe none. The cultural trauma is almost worse than the physical effects. The Salarians didn't deploy the genophage immediately. They tested it first, extensively, made sure it would work as designed, that it wouldn't mutate into something worse, that it could be controlled. And then they made a political decision. They went to the Turians. The Turians had just discovered the Citadel after their own difficult first contact period. They were military-minded, organized, and they were appalled by the Krogan rebellions. The Turians believed in hierarchy, in order, in rules and regulations that everyone follows. The Krogan represented chaos.
So when the Salarians offered a way to end the rebellions without a genocidal war, the Turians agreed to deploy it. Turian Special Forces, working with STG operatives, released the genophage into Krogan population centers. It spread through intimate contact, through populations. Within years, every Krogan in Citadel space was infected. The effects took time to become apparent, but gradually, the Krogan realized what had been done to them. The reaction was predictable: rage, attempts at retaliation. But the rebellions were already failing by then. Krogan expansion had overreached. Supply lines were stretched. And without new generations of warriors, they couldn't sustain the offensive. The rebellions collapsed not in a final battle, but in a slow retreat as the Krogan realized they were fighting for a future that no longer existed. The Turians established the demilitarized zone around Krogan space.
Enforced it with their fleet. The Krogan were contained. The galaxy was safe. And an entire species was left to contemplate its slow extinction. The genophage worked exactly as designed. That's what makes it so terrible. It wasn't a mistake or an accident. The Salarians created a weapon that would cripple Krogan reproduction without killing them outright, that would end the rebellions without requiring genocide. And it succeeded perfectly. The Krogan are still dying out 1,000 years later because the genophage still works exactly as intended. But biology evolves, and populations adapt. Over the centuries, some Krogan began showing natural resistance to the genophage. Not immunity, but higher conception rates, maybe 1 in 500 instead of 1 in 1,000. Small improvements, but they meant some clans had better chances than others. That evolution was beginning to work around the imposed genetic modification. The Salarians noticed. Of course they did. The STG monitors everything. And in the 2180s, roughly 30 years before the events of Mass Effect 3, they modified the genophage. They updated it to account for the natural resistances that had developed. They re-optimized it to maintain the original conception rates. This modification was led by a team of Salarian scientists working on Surkesh. One of them was Morden Solace, a brilliant geneticist, an STG operative, and a person who would spend the rest of his life wrestling with what he'd done. Morden's justification was purely mathematical. The Krogan still outnumbered every other Citadel race, despite the genophage. If their population recovered to pre-genophage levels, the result would be another series of rebellions. More death, more destruction. The genophage saved lives, both Krogan and non-Krogan. It was tragic, horrific, but necessary. The math was clear, except the math didn't account for individual suffering. It didn't account for Krogan females who'd hold stillborn eggs and scream their grief, for Krogan males who'd watch their species die and become bitter and violent because what else was there? For the cultural death that was happening alongside the population decline. The math was right, but was it moral?
Morden would eventually conclude it wasn't. Years later, when Commander Shepard meets him running a clinic in the slums of Omega, Morden is trying to atone. He's healing people, saving lives, working himself to exhaustion to balance the scales, but he still defends the genophage intellectually, even as he questions it emotionally. The genophage didn't just affect the Krogan. It changed the entire galaxy's perception of the Salarians. Before, they were the brilliant scientists, the valued counselors. After, they were the species that created a weapon to cripple another species' ability to reproduce. No matter how justified by military necessity, that's a dark legacy. The Krogan certainly never forgave it. Krogan culture became obsessed with the genophage. Their art, their music, their politics. Everything filtered through the lens of this genetic curse that doomed them. Some Krogan became mercenaries, seeking glory in combat since they couldn't find it in raising children. Others became fatalistic, accepting extinction as inevitable. A few became researchers, desperately seeking a cure that might save their species. Malon, a former student of Morden's, was one of these researchers. He went to Tuchanka and conducted experiments trying to cure the genophage. His methods were unethical, horrific even, using live subjects, female Krogan who volunteered hoping their suffering might lead to a cure. The experiments failed. They produced more suffering without producing results. When Morden discovers what his former student has done, he's appalled. This is the wrong way. Cruel. Inefficient. If a cure is to be developed, it needs to be done properly, with ethics, with consideration for the subjects involved. Malon's work is brilliant, but monstrous. Morden has to decide whether to preserve the data despite how it was gathered. This decision haunts players. The data might be necessary for a future cure, but using it means validating Malon's torture. It's a variation of the Nazi research dilemma from Earth's history. Can you ethically use data gathered through atrocity? There's no clean answer. By the time of Mass Effect 3, the political situation around the genophage becomes critical. The Reapers are invading. The galaxy needs every possible asset to fight back. The Krogan, despite being a dying species, still represent significant military power. Urdnot Rex, or Urdnot Reeve, depending on player choices, leads a united Tuchanka, and they want a cure as the price of their support. The Salarians, specifically Dalatris Linron, refuse. Their logic is cold but consistent. Curing the genophage gives the Krogan their reproduction back. After the Reaper War, the Krogan will be stronger than ever, and they'll remember who created the genophage. The Salarians will be targeted for revenge. Better to let the Krogan remain dying but useful than cure them and face future rebellions. Morden disagrees. He's run the numbers. Urdnot Rex is a leader who can control Krogan aggression, who wants peace and cooperation. Cure the genophage with Rex in charge and the Krogan can be trusted. Don't cure it, and you're condemning a species to extinction for crimes their ancestors committed centuries ago. The equation has changed. The moral calculus has changed. The cure is now the right answer. If players support the cure, Morden synthesizes one using the STG research and Malon's data if you preserved it. The cure is dispersed through the Shroud. But remember, the STG sabotaged the Shroud centuries ago. Morden has to fix the sabotage manually. And that means staying behind when the tower collapses. His death is one of the most powerful moments in the trilogy. Morden, singing his favorite Gilbert and Sullivan song, riding the elevator up
into the tower, knowing he won't come back, making peace with his legacy. He created a weapon that doomed a species. Now he's giving his life to cure it. The math has balanced. Had to be me. Someone else might have gotten it wrong. If players sabotage the cure, the outcome is darker. Morden dies believing he's saved the Krogan, but the cure doesn't work. The genophage continues. The Krogan remain dying. And Shepard has to live with having betrayed both Morden and Rex for the sake of keeping Salarian support. It's a ruthlessly pragmatic choice. Exactly the kind of choice the Salarians would make. And it's morally devastating. The genophage represents everything complicated about the Salarians. It was created by brilliant minds to solve a genuine problem. The Krogan rebellions were real. The threat was existential. Something had to be done. The genophage worked. It ended the rebellions without requiring complete genocide. From a utilitarian perspective, it saved lives. More people survived because the genophage existed than would have survived in a prolonged war. But it's also a crime. A deliberate genetic modification designed to cripple a species' reproduction. The Krogan are dying out because of a weapon deployed 1,000 years ago. Generations of Krogan have suffered for the actions of their ancestors. Is that justice? Is it pragmatism? Or is it just cruelty dressed up in scientific language and mathematical justification? The Salarians argue it's necessary. The Krogan argue it's genocide. Both have points, and the tragedy is that there's no clean answer. The genophage is simultaneously a successful strategic weapon and a moral abomination. It's proof that intelligence and ethics don't always align, that you can be brilliant and still do terrible things, that the math might be right even when the choice is wrong. The genophage is the Salarians' greatest achievement and their darkest sin, and the galaxy will never look at them the same way again. Chapter 6: Military Philosophy and Technological Edge. The Salarians don't win through force. They can't. Their military is relatively small. Their economy, while advanced, is the weakest of the three council races. In a straight conventional war against the Turians, or even the humans, they'd lose. But the Salarians don't fight straight conventional wars. They fight smart, and they've refined that approach into a military doctrine that's shaped galactic warfare for 2 millennia. The core principle is simple. A war should be won before it begins. Not as metaphor, but as operational reality. The Salarians invest more in intelligence gathering and analysis than they do in ships and weapons. Their military spending focuses on reconnaissance craft, sensor networks, infiltration units, and the STG. By the time shots are fired, they've already mapped enemy positions, intercepted communications, identified vulnerabilities, and positioned assets to exploit them. This creates a particular type of military, small but incredibly efficient. Salarian forces specialize in maneuver warfare, fast strikes, hit-and-run tactics, asymmetric engagement,
They avoid battles they can't win and only fight when they have overwhelming intelligence advantage. If they can't guarantee victory, they don't engage. They withdraw, gather more information, and attack when conditions favor them. Salarian ships are built for speed and stealth rather than armor and firepower. Their frigates are fast scouts. Their cruisers pack sophisticated sensor arrays that can detect enemy vessels at extreme range. They have ships dedicated entirely to electronic warfare, jamming enemy communications, spoofing sensors, creating false targets that draw fire while real attacks come from unexpected angles. The Salarian fleet doctrine is defensive in orientation. They maintain enough ships to protect their core worlds and patrol their borders, but they don't try to match the Turian navy ship for ship. Instead, they rely on the alliance with the Turians. Any enemy attacking Salarian space knows they'll face Turian intervention, and the Turians have the largest military in Citadel space. That threat alone deters most potential aggressors. Where the Salarians truly excel is in ground operations, not frontline combat. That's what you hire Krogan or Turians for, but special operations. The STG runs missions that conventional forces can't. They infiltrate enemy facilities, gather intelligence, sabotage critical infrastructure, turn enemy assets, and create the conditions for conventional forces to exploit. A typical Salarian military operation might go like this. STG operatives infiltrate the target area weeks or months in advance. They gather information on enemy dispositions, logistics, command structure. They identify key individuals, where they live, their habits, their weaknesses. They map communication networks, power grids, transportation hubs. When the operation goes active, the STG strikes first. Key personnel experience convenient accidents. Communication nodes fail at critical moments. Supply depots explode. The enemy's intelligence network is compromised from within. By the time conventional forces arrive, the enemy is already degraded, confused, reacting to crises instead of mounting coordinated defense. The actual military engagement is short. Overwhelming force applied at the right place and time. Objectives secured before the enemy can respond effectively. Then withdrawal before reinforcements arrive. The Salarians don't hold territory through occupation. They accomplish their objectives and leave, letting the political situation stabilize naturally, or arranging for allied forces to maintain control. This approach minimizes casualties. Salarian soldiers are too valuable to waste in grinding attritional warfare. With their short lifespans, every Salarian lost represents not just one death, but the loss of potential contributions that individual might have made in their remaining years. So the military culture emphasizes preservation of life, not through cowardice, but through intelligence and planning that make sacrifice unnecessary. The Salarian approach to rules of engagement baffles other species. They see nothing wrong with striking first if intelligence indicates an enemy is planning to attack. Why wait for the enemy to fire the first shot if you know that shot is coming? Preemptive strikes are standard doctrine. If you wait for permission to defend yourself, you're already losing. This has caused friction with humans, particularly. The Systems Alliance military operates on principles of proportional response and clear rules of engagement. You don't fire until fired upon. You don't escalate without authorization. The Salarians find this incomprehensible. They've explained patiently that if you know someone is going to hit you, you hit them first. But humans keep insisting on waiting for actual hostile action before responding. The Turians understand the Salarian approach better. Turian doctrine also emphasizes preemption, though they prefer official declarations of war. The Salarians have pointed out that officially declaring war gives the enemy time to prepare. The Turians counter that some honor should be maintained even in warfare. It's a philosophical disagreement between allies who respect each other enough to agree to disagree. Technologically, the Salarians punch above their weight. They're constantly innovating, experimenting with new designs and concepts that other species consider too risky or impractical. Salarian research and development operates at a pace that makes other species uncomfortable. Part of this is necessity. With small military forces, they need technological advantages to compete. But part is cultural. Salarians are scientists by nature. They can't help but experiment and innovate. It's how their minds work. Give a Salarian engineer a standard design, and they'll immediately start thinking of ways to improve it. Military technology is just another field for their natural curiosity. Some Salarian innovations have become standard across Citadel space. The Normandy SR-1, the ship Commander Shepard commands in Mass Effect 1, is a human-Turian joint venture built around a Salarian-designed stealth system. The technology uses advanced heat sinks and specialized hull coatings to make the ship virtually invisible to sensors. It's revolutionary. A frigate that can operate in hostile space undetected. The Salarians developed this system years before sharing it, with the Alliance and Hierarchy. They'd used it in STG operations where stealth was critical. But after the Battle of the Citadel, when the Reaper threat became undeniable, they agreed to share advanced technologies with allied species. The Normandy program was the result. Salarian weapons technology tends toward the exotic. They experiment with things other species consider too dangerous or impractical. Directed energy weapons that
Are more efficient than mass accelerators, but require more power. Biological weapons, though these are heavily restricted by Citadel law. Nanotech swarms that can disable electronic systems. If it's cutting edge and potentially useful, the Salarians are researching it. The genophage is the most famous example of Salarian bioweapon research, but it's not the only one. The Salarians maintain extensive biological research programs. Officially, these are for defensive purposes, understanding potential threats, developing countermeasures. But everyone knows the Salarians are also developing offensive capabilities, just in case. This makes other species nervous. The Salarians have proven they're willing to deploy bioweapons when they judge it necessary. What else might they have developed in their secure research facilities on Surkesh? What other genetic modifications or designer plagues exist in Salarian arsenals? The STG isn't talking, which means the uncertainty itself becomes a weapon. Potential enemies have to assume the Salarians have capabilities they don't, and plan accordingly. Cybersecurity is another Salarian strength. Their VI and AI researchers are among the best in the galaxy. They build secure communication networks. They develop intrusion countermeasures. And though they don't advertise it, they maintain offensive cyber capabilities that can penetrate almost any system. The STG's Cyber Warfare Division is legendary in intelligence circles. They've penetrated classified networks of every major power in the galaxy at some point.
not necessarily to steal information, though they do that too, but to prove they can, to map the networks, to position backdoors and Trojans that might be useful in future conflicts. Salarian cyber operations are so sophisticated that most victims never know they've been compromised. During the Reaper War, this became critically important. The Reapers indoctrinate through a combination of psychological manipulation and technological influence. Their systems can subvert organic minds and synthetic ones. Fighting them requires understanding how indoctrination works at a technical level. The Salarians were essential to that effort. Salarian scientists working with Alliance researchers and Turian engineers developed countermeasures, shielding that reduced indoctrination effects, protocols for identifying compromised personnel before they could sabotage operations, detection systems that could identify Reaper signal patterns. The technical battle against indoctrination was fought largely by Salarian minds working at speeds other species couldn't match. The Salarian approach to warfare is fundamentally about force multiplication. How do you make a small military effective against larger forces? Superior intelligence, better technology, striking at the right moment with precision rather than overwhelming firepower. It's chess, not boxing. And the Salarians are grand masters who've spent 2,000 years perfecting their game. This creates a military culture very different from the Turians or Krogan. There's less emphasis on valor and honor in direct combat, more emphasis on cleverness and efficiency. A Salarian soldier who avoids a fight through superior positioning is praised more than one who wins through bravery. Why risk casualties when you can accomplish the objective without fighting? Some species see this as cowardice. The Krogan particularly have little respect for Salarian military prowess. They remember the rebellions. Remember that the Salarians didn't beat them in battle. They used a bioweapon, fought smart instead of hard. To Krogan sensibilities, there's something dishonorable about that. A real warrior faces their enemy directly. The Salarians don't care. Honor is a luxury they can't afford. They're small. They have short lives. They can't waste resources on symbolic gestures. Results matter. Survival matters. If that means striking from shadows instead of marching in formation, so be it. They'll leave honor to species that can afford it. But this pragmatism has limits. The Salarians aren't cowards. Captain Kira proved that on Vermeer. When the mission required a direct assault, when there was no clever alternative, the STG went in anyway. They held the line. They died if necessary. Because sometimes the mission demands sacrifice, and Salarians understand that as well as any species. The balance between cleverness and courage is what makes the Salarian military effective. They avoid unnecessary fights through intelligence and planning, but when combat is unavoidable, they fight with the same hyperactive intensity they bring to everything else. Fast, efficient, making every shot count because they know they can't afford prolonged engagements.
Their defensive installations reflect this philosophy. Salarian military bases are layered defense networks, sensor coverage that detects intruders from extreme range, automated defense systems that engage threats before personnel are at risk, fortifications designed to channel attackers into kill zones. The goal is to defeat enemies before they get close enough for direct combat. During peacetime, the Salarian military runs constant exercises and simulations. They game out hundreds of potential conflict scenarios. How would they respond to a Turian invasion if the Alliance collapsed? What if the Krogan somehow recovered from the genophage and attacked? What if the humans turned hostile? Every possibility is analyzed, planned for, filed away for reference. This might seem paranoid, but to Salarians, it's just prudence. Hope for peace, but plan for war. Understand that today's ally might be tomorrow's enemy. Keep contingencies ready, even if you never use them. The STG maintains updated invasion plans for every major power in the galaxy, not because they intend to invade, but because having the plans means understanding vulnerabilities. And understanding vulnerabilities means knowing how to defend against those same attack vectors being used against them. The Salarian contribution to galactic military power isn't measured in ships or soldiers. It's measured in intelligence shared, technologies developed, operations conducted that prevented conflicts from escalating. They're not frontline warriors. They're the support structure that makes everyone else more effective. And in their own way, that's just as important as Turian dreadnoughts or Asari commandos. During the Reaper War, this became explicit. The Salarians couldn't field massive fleets, but they could provide the intelligence that let allied fleets operate effectively. They could develop technologies to counter Reaper advantages. They could run operations that disrupted Reaper coordination and supply. The war wasn't won by any single species or strategy, but Salarian contributions were essential to the victory that eventually came. The Salarian military represents the ultimate expression of their philosophy: intelligence over strength, planning over improvisation, efficiency over endurance. It's a military built by and for a species that thinks faster than everyone else and has learned to leverage that advantage into power far beyond what their numbers would suggest. Small but sophisticated, weak in appearance but dangerous in reality. Never underestimate the species that wrote the book on winning wars before they start. Chapter 7. Culture and Philosophy. Understanding Salarian military doctrine and government structure only takes you so far. To really understand the species, you need to examine how they think, what they value, how they see the universe and their place in it. Salarian culture is built on principles that often seem alien to other species, shaped by biology that creates fundamental differences in perspective. Speed is central to everything. Salarians experience time differently than longer-lived species. A Salarian lifetime of 40 years feels compressed to them, but not rushed. They don't feel like they're constantly racing against the clock. They simply operate at a faster pace that feels natural to their accelerated metabolism and thought processes. This creates a culture that values efficiency almost religiously. Why take an hour to accomplish something when you could do it in 10 minutes? Why use 10 words when 3 will do? Salarians are famously rapid speakers, their conversations happening at a pace that makes other species struggle to keep up. They interrupt frequently, not out of rudeness, but because they've already anticipated where the speaker is going and want to move the conversation forward. To outsiders, Salarians can seem impatient or dismissive, but they're not trying to be rude. They're just operating on a different clock. Imagine being stuck behind someone walking slowly on a crowded sidewalk. That's how Salarians experience most interactions with other species, waiting for slower minds to reach conclusions they arrived at minutes ago. This speed extends to how they process information. Salarians are voracious consumers of data. They read incredibly fast, absorbing texts that would take humans hours in a fraction of the time. Their scientific papers are dense with information, assuming readers can process complex concepts without extensive explanation. A Salarian textbook is intimidating to non-Salarians, packed with details that seem to skip steps because the author assumed readers would make the intuitive leaps themselves. The photographic memory makes Salarians natural scholars and historians. They preserve information not just in written form, but in the memories of individuals who can recall details from decades past with perfect clarity. Salarian historians are walking libraries, able to reference obscure events and quote long-dead figures without consulting notes. This creates enormous respect for knowledge and learning. Education is highly valued in Salarian society. The best and brightest are celebrated. Universities on Surkesh are prestigious institutions where competition for admission is fierce. Being accepted to one of the top research institutes is a mark of distinction that follows you for life. But there's a utilitarian bent to Salarian scholarship. They value knowledge that has applications. Pure research for its own sake is respected, but applied science is celebrated. If you can take a theoretical principle and turn it into working technology, you're doing science the right way. Salarian research culture pushes constantly toward practical outcomes, toward inventions and innovations that solve problems. This sometimes puts them at odds with Asari scholars, who take a longer view. The Asari can pursue research questions for centuries, slowly building understanding through patient accumulation of data. Salarians don't have that luxury. They need results within their lifetimes, so they push harder, take bigger risks, and sometimes make breakthroughs the Asari wouldn't reach for centuries, even though the Asari approach is more thorough. Family and clan loyalty is profound in Salarian culture. Remember, hatching imprinting means you're psychologically bonded to your clan from birth. This isn't just cultural conditioning. It's hardwired into Salarian psychology. You literally cannot help but defer to your Dalatras and the authority figures who were present when you hatched. This creates a society where betraying your clan is almost psychologically impossible. Salarians might disagree with clan policies. They might argue with their Dalatras, but they won't betray the clan to outsiders. The imprinting ensures loyalty that goes deeper than mere allegiance. It's identity itself. Extended families are enormous. Your fourth circle clan includes millions of members, but Salarians track these relationships effortlessly. They know who's connected to whom, how close the relationship is, what obligations exist. At clan gatherings, which can include thousands of individuals, Salarians navigate the social landscape with perfect recall of every relationship and every previous interaction. Non-Salarians find this overwhelming. Humans might struggle to remember names at a family reunion of 50 people. Salarians attend gatherings of thousands and know everyone. They remember what you talked about at the last gathering 5 years ago. They recall favors owed and debts outstanding. The social complexity that would overwhelm other species is just normal life for them. The political implications of this are significant. When a idolatress makes a decision, she's not just considering her immediate family or even her first circle clan. She's considering millions of clan members across multiple worlds. Political negotiations involve tracking relationships and obligations across vast networks, and breeding contracts, which create permanent bonds between clans, are planned with considerations that span generations. Romantic love, as other species experience it, is largely absent from Salarian culture. There's no equivalent to human pair bonding or Asari mating. Relationships between individual Salarians exist, certainly. Friendships, professional partnerships, mentorships. But sexual attraction isn't a factor because sexual behavior is purely for reproduction, and that's controlled by social codes. This makes Salarians seem cold or unemotional to species like humans who tie sexuality to bonding. But Salarians experience deep emotions, just not romantic ones. They love their clan members. They form profound friendships. They experience grief and joy and pride and shame. They're not emotionless. They're just not romantic. Morden Sonlis discusses this in conversations with Commander Shepard. He finds human obsession with sexuality fascinating and somewhat confusing. Why do humans complicate everything with sexual attraction? Why make important decisions based on who you want to mate with? It seems inefficient to him. Better to separate reproduction from emotion, to make those decisions rationally based on clan needs and genetic compatibility. But Morden admits there's something appealing about human romantic relationships when he observes them. The idea of choosing a partner based on emotional connection rather than political calculation, the spontaneity of it. He doesn't feel romantic attraction himself, but he can appreciate it as an interesting alternative to Salarian methods. Art and culture in Salarian society tend toward the intellectual rather than emotional. Salarian music is complex, mathematical, built on patterns and rhythms that other species find difficult to follow. Salarian literature prizes cleverness and wordplay. Their humor is quick, often based on rapidly delivered observations that require fast thinking to appreciate. They produce excellent scientific papers and technical documentation. Salarian engineering manuals are clear, precise, efficient, but their poetry to non-Salarians
often seems more like logic puzzles than emotional expression. Beautiful in its own way, but alien. There's a famous Salarian art form that involves creating intricate logical proofs that also form visual patterns. Mathematics as art. The elegance of a perfectly constructed argument that also happens to be aesthetically pleasing when written out. Other species look at it and see equations. Salarians see beauty. Religion is less prominent in Salarian culture than in many species. They're not atheistic, but they're pragmatic about belief. If gods exist, they operate according to consistent principles that can be studied and understood. There are Salarian theologians, but they approach faith more like a research problem than a spiritual journey. What evidence exists for divine intervention? How would one test theological claims? Can prayer outcomes be statistically analyzed? This doesn't mean Salarians can't be spiritual. Some are, but even their spirituality tends to be intellectual, contemplating the mathematical perfection of the universe, wondering about the nature of consciousness and whether there's meaning beyond physical existence. These are questions Salarian philosophers engage with seriously, but they do so with the same analytical mindset they bring to scientific problems. The attitude toward death is practical. Salarians know they have roughly 40 years. They accept this. The goal is to accomplish what you can in the time available, to contribute to your clan, to advance knowledge, to leave things better than you found them. There's no cultural obsession with immortality or afterlife. You live, you work, you die. What matters is what you accomplished. This can make Salarians seem callous about death. A Salarian scientist who dies at 40 is remembered for their contributions. There's grief, certainly, especially from clan members who knew them personally. But there's also acknowledgement that they had a full life by Salarian standards. They accomplished what they were going to accomplish. Now it's time for the next generation. This attitude extends to how Salarians view their own mortality in dangerous situations. STG operatives accept death as a possibility with remarkable calm, not because they're suicidal or fatalistic, but because they've already calculated that their mission's success is worth the risk to their individual lives. The math makes sense, so fear, while present, doesn't paralyze. Morden exemplifies this in his final moments. He knows he's going to die fixing the shroud. He's made peace with it. Had to be me. It's not bravado. It's not even particularly brave by human standards. It's just logical. He had the knowledge, he had the skills. Someone needed to do it. Therefore, him. The fact that it costs his life is regrettable, but acceptable given what's accomplished. The Salarian worldview is fundamentally consequentialist. Outcomes matter more than intentions. You're judged by what you accomplish, not what you meant to do. This creates a culture that's remarkably forgiving of mistakes if you learned from them, but harsh on repeated failures. The genophage is defended not because the Salarians are proud of it, but because it accomplished its goal, ending the Krogan rebellions with fewer deaths than a prolonged war would have caused. This consequentialism can seem ruthlessly amoral to species with more deontological ethics. Humans believe some actions are wrong regardless of outcomes. The Salarians struggle with this concept.
How can an action be wrong if it produces the best possible result? If more people benefit than suffer, isn't that the definition of right action? This philosophical divide creates friction. Humans see the genophage as morally wrong, even if it was strategically necessary. Salarians see it as tragic, but justified by the outcomes. Neither perspective is entirely wrong, but they're incompatible worldviews that create misunderstandings and moral conflicts. The Salarian gift to galactic civilization is their approach to problems: fast thinking, creative solutions, willingness to consider options other species might dismiss as too radical or risky. They push boundaries, they innovate, they ask what if and why not in ways that lead to breakthroughs. But the curse is that same pragmatism taken too far. When everything is reduced to calculations and outcomes, when individual suffering becomes just another variable in an equation, morality becomes mathematics. And mathematics, for all its elegance, doesn't account for the full weight of suffering, doesn't capture what it means to hold a dead child or watch your species die. The Salarians are brilliant. There's no question of that. They've shaped the galaxy through sheer intellectual force, but brilliance without wisdom is dangerous. And the Salarians, for all their intelligence, sometimes lack the wisdom to know when the math shouldn't matter, when the calculation should be overridden by compassion, when being right isn't enough if you're also causing suffering that could be avoided. Understanding Salarian culture means grappling with this contradiction, admiring their achievements while questioning their methods, respecting their intelligence while challenging their assumptions. They're not villains, but they're not heroes either. They're a species doing the best they can with the biology and psychology they were given, making choices that seem logical to them, even when those choices horrify others. Chapter 8: The Reaper War and Salarian Contributions. When the Reapers finally arrived in force, when Sovereign's warnings at the Battle of the Citadel proved to be prelude rather than conclusion, the galaxy faced an enemy unlike anything encountered before. Ancient machines of godlike power, technology so advanced it seemed like magic, strategic thinking that operated on timescales of millennia. The Reapers were everything the Salarians feared, an enemy that couldn't be predicted, manipulated, or defeated through conventional intelligence operations. But the Salarians adapted, because that's what they do. The initial Reaper assault hit Earth. The human homeworld was under siege before anyone could respond. The Alliance called for help. Every species, every asset. But the Reapers weren't just attacking Earth. They were everywhere. Polovin, the Turian homeworld, under attack. Thessia, the Asari capital, would fall later. Surkesh itself was under threat. Every species was fighting for survival on their own ground. The Salarians faced a terrible calculation: commit forces to help Earth and potentially leave Surkesh vulnerable, or defend their own territory and let humanity burn.
The Dalatrases were divided. Some argued for cooperation. The Reapers were everyone's enemy. Only united action had any chance of success. Others argued that Salarian resources should focus on Salarian defense. Help others after ensuring your own survival. In the end, they compromised. Some Salarian forces joined the coalition. Others remained on defensive duty. But the real Salarian contribution wasn't military. It was intelligence and technology. The things Salarians do better than anyone else. The STG immediately began analyzing Reaper capabilities, gathering data from every engagement, studying the patterns. The Reapers used indoctrination as a weapon, turning organics into servants through a combination of technological influence and psychological manipulation. Understanding indoctrination became a priority. If you could counter it, protect against it, you could preserve your forces from internal corruption. Salarian neuroscientists worked with human researchers and Asari psychologists. They studied indoctrinated subjects, not cruelly, but necessarily, mapped the neural changes, identified the chemical imbalances the Reaper technology created, and developed countermeasures. Not perfect protection. Indoctrination was too subtle, too powerful for complete immunity. But protocols that reduced susceptibility, warning signs to watch for, treatment methods that could help those in early stages. This research saved countless lives. Every ship captain who recognized indoctrination symptoms in their crew before sabotage could occur. Every base commander who implemented screening protocols that caught compromised personnel. That was Salarian work. Invisible, unheralded, but critical. The Crucible Project became the focus of galactic cooperation. Ancient plans for a weapon, device, something that could stop the Reapers. Found on Mars in the data caches the Protheans left behind. Nobody understood what it was, but it represented hope, and hope demanded action. Building the Crucible required resources from every species: raw materials, manufacturing capacity, the engineering genius to translate incomplete Prothean schematics into working technology. The Salarians contributed their scientific expertise, their fastest thinkers tackling problems that would take other species months, days of work, accomplishing what others needed weeks to complete. But there was a political complication: the genophage. Urdnot Rex, the Krogan leader who'd unified his species, demanded a cure as the price of full Krogan support. Without it, the Krogan would defend their own territory but wouldn't commit forces elsewhere. With it, Krogan warriors would join the coalition, adding significant military power. The Salarians, specifically Dalatris Linrone, refused. The arguments were familiar. Cure the genophage and the Krogan would recover. After the war, assuming victory, the Krogan would be stronger than ever. And they'd remember who created the genophage, who kept them dying for centuries. The Salarians would face revenge. Better to fight the Reapers with the forces available than create a future threat while dealing with the present one. Commander Shepard had to decide: support the cure and gain Krogan support but lose Salarian cooperation, or sabotage the cure, keep Salarian support but betray the Krogan. There was no clean answer,
no choice that didn't involve sacrificing someone. If Shepard chose to cure the genophage, Morden Solace or his replacement, Paddock Wicks, would synthesize the cure and disperse it through the shroud. The Krogan would gain their reproduction back. Female Krogan would hold living children instead of stillborn eggs. The species would have a future. And the Salarians, at least officially through the Dalatrace, would withdraw some support. But not all Salarians agreed with their leadership. Major Kiri, if he survived Vermeer, would provide support regardless. He understood that defeating the Reapers required unity, that old grudges had to be set aside. Other Salarian commanders made similar choices. They followed their conscience, even when it contradicted their government's position. This revealed something important about Salarians. They're not monolithic. Individual Salarians make individual choices based on their own calculations and principles. The Dalatraces set policy, but they can't control every Salarian's actions, especially in STG, where operatives are trained to think independently and given broad discretionary authority. If Shepard chose to sabotage the cure, the outcome was darker. The genophage continued. The Krogan thought they were cured but weren't. They provided military support for a war effort that had betrayed them. And Shepard carried that secret, knowing that the survival of other species had been purchased with Krogan suffering. The Salarian contributions to the Reaper War went beyond the genophage controversy. They provided critical intelligence throughout the conflict. STG units operating behind Reaper lines, gathering data on enemy movements and tactics, identifying high-value targets, finding weaknesses in Reaper forces that could be exploited. The Reapers were powerful but not omniscient. They relied on predictable patterns, ancient strategies refined over millions of years. The Salarians studied these patterns, found the places where Reaper forces were thinner, where supply lines could be cut, where a surgical strike could accomplish what a major offensive couldn't. Salarian listening posts picked up Reaper communications, encrypted, impossible to fully decode, but the patterns in the transmissions revealed information anyway. When Reaper forces were massing for an attack, communication traffic increased. When they were consolidating territory, it decreased. You didn't need to read the messages to learn from them. Just watching the metadata provided actionable intelligence. Technology development accelerated under war conditions. The Salarians created new weapons, new countermeasures. Things that would normally take years of testing were field deployed after weeks. Some failed. Some worked brilliantly. All of it was shared with Allied forces. Because this wasn't about Salarian advantage anymore. It was about species survival. The Normandy SR-2, Shepard's ship during the Reaper War, benefited from continuous Salarian upgrades, better sensors, more efficient stealth systems, improved electronic countermeasures. Salarian engineers worked alongside Alliance technical staff, sharing knowledge that would have been classified under peacetime conditions.
This cooperation extended to other species. The Turians shared military intelligence. The Asari opened their archives. The humans contributed resources and manufacturing. The Quarians provided expertise in fighting synthetic enemies. The Geth, if allied, contributed processing power and unique perspectives on combating AI opponents. Everyone brought what they could, and the Salarians brought their minds. On Surkesh itself, the STG facility housed research critical to the war effort. The Salarians had been studying uplifted species potential, remember? Yogg, Varin, Forcha. During the Reaper War, that research took on new urgency. Could any of these species be used against the Reapers? The Yogg were too dangerous to uplift. But what about using them as experimental subjects for anti-indoctrination measures? They were intelligent, aggressive, and there was one in captivity already. This research raised ethical questions. Using sapient beings as test subjects, even hostile ones. The Salarians grappled with this. Some researchers refused to participate. Others argued that in war, normal ethics become luxury. The debate continued, even as the research proceeded, because Salarians, for all their pragmatism, understood that some lines once crossed couldn't be uncrossed. The Salarian fleet, while smaller than Turian or human forces, fought with distinction. Fast frigates and destroyers harrying Reaper capital ships, drawing fire, creating openings for heavier vessels to exploit. Salarian ship captains proved themselves masters of hit-and-run tactics. Strike, withdraw, reposition, strike again. Never presenting a stationary target, never fighting fair. Reaper forces adapted slowly. Their strategies were refined over countless cycles, but that meant they were also predictable once you understood the patterns. The Salarians excelled at finding and exploiting those patterns. They couldn't match Reaper firepower, but they could confuse Reaper targeting, could waste Reaper resources, forcing them to respond to threats that weren't primary objectives. There's a famous engagement near Materos where a Salarian flotilla held off 3 Reaper capital ships for 6 hours. They shouldn't have survived. The Reapers outgunned them completely, but the Salarian commander used every trick available: sensor spoofing, false retreat that drew Reaper forces into friendly fire zones, coordinated strikes that maximized damage while minimizing exposure. The flotilla lost half its ships, but they accomplished their mission, delaying the Reapers long enough for civilian evacuations to complete. In the final battle, when the combined fleets of all species converged on Earth to protect the Crucible, the Salarians were there. Their ships formed screening forces, protected larger vessels, conducted electronic warfare that degraded Reaper coordination. When the Crucible activated, when the war ended in whatever fashion player choices determined, the Salarians had earned their place in the victory. The cost was high. Surkesh was damaged, not destroyed like Thessia would be, but scarred. Population losses were significant.
the Salarian fleet was reduced to a fraction of its pre-war strength, and there were psychological costs. The Reapers had demonstrated that intelligence alone wasn't enough, that perfect information couldn't guarantee victory when your enemy was simply that much more powerful. For a species that prided itself on being the smartest people in the room, the Reaper War was humbling. The Salarians couldn't outsmart the Reapers, couldn't predict them reliably, couldn't manipulate them. They had to fight, had to bleed, had to accept that sometimes raw power matters more than cleverness. But they adapted, because adaptation is what intelligence really means. The Salarians learned, they contributed, they fought alongside species they'd manipulated in the past, and they helped win a war that their doctrine said couldn't be won, because doctrine is just theory. Reality is what matters, and reality demanded cooperation, sacrifice, and acceptance that being the smartest doesn't mean being the strongest. The Reaper War changed the Salarians, made them less confident in their ability to control events through intelligence alone, made them more willing to share information and cooperate openly, made them understand that galactic civilization required not just clever manipulation, but genuine alliance. The lessons were painful, but the Salarians learned them, because that's what they do best. Learn, adapt, survive. Chapter 9: Legacy and Influence. The Salarians have been part of galactic civilization for over 2,000 years. That's a blink by Asari standards. Their species lives fast and dies young, but in those 2 millennia, they've shaped the galaxy as profoundly as any species. Their influence touches everything from how wars are fought, to how governments share intelligence, to what technologies drive progress. The immediate legacy is infrastructure. The Citadel itself was discovered by the Asari, yes, but the Salarians helped figure out how it worked. Those early decades of joint exploration by Asari and Salarian scientists mapped the station's systems, understood the mass relay network, decoded enough Prothean technology to make it functional for contemporary species. Without Salarian engineering and scientific expertise, the Citadel might still be an impressive ruin rather than the heart of galactic government. The council structure owes much to Salarian thinking, the idea of pooling resources and intelligence among species, creating structures for cooperation. The Citadel fleet that enforces council authority operates on principles the Salarians helped establish: shared command, distributed resources, intelligence-driven operations. The Salarians didn't invent all of it, but they refined it and made it functional. The Spectre program, as mentioned, is modeled on the STG. That's a direct Salarian contribution. The idea that elite agents with broad discretionary powers can handle crises more effectively than conventional forces or bureaucratic procedures. Every Spectre owes their existence to Salarian operational philosophy, even if they don't know it, even if they'd resent the comparison. uplift policy throughout Citadel space was largely shaped by the Krogan experience. The Salarians uplifted the Krogan. It worked in the short term. It created a catastrophe in the long term. So now there are rules, strict protocols about contact with pre-spaceflight civilizations, requirements about technological and social development before species are granted council recognition. These rules exist because the Salarians learned the hard way what happens when you accelerate a species' development without considering long-term consequences. The genophage itself is a legacy that will haunt the Salarians for millennia, even if it's cured, even if the Krogan forgive them, which is not guaranteed. The fact that the Salarians created and deployed a bioweapon that crippled a species' reproduction will be in history books forever. Future generations will study it as a case study in military ethics, in the dangers of consequentialist thinking, in what happens when intelligence isn't tempered with wisdom. But the genophage also represents Salarian willingness to do the terrible, necessary thing. Other species might have negotiated longer, might have tried more diplomatic solutions, might have accepted continued warfare rather than deploy such a weapon. The Salarians calculated the cost and accepted it. That's both their strength and their flaw, the capacity to make hard choices without flinching, without letting sentiment interfere with necessity. Scientific progress throughout Citadel space owes enormous debt to Salarian research. They're constantly pushing boundaries, publishing papers that other species spend years trying to understand, developing technologies that become standard decades after Salarians first experiment with them. The stealth systems in modern warships, the medical technologies that extended average lifespans for species like humans, the agricultural techniques that turned marginal worlds into productive colonies, Salarian innovations shared with the galactic community. This generosity with knowledge is sometimes strategic. Share technology to build goodwill, create dependencies, ensure other species need Salarian expertise. But it's also cultural. Salarians believe knowledge should be used, that discoveries should improve lives. They're not altruistic exactly, but they're not hoarding knowledge either. If you can turn a theoretical principle into practical application, you should. That's how science works. That's how civilization advances. The relationship between Salarians and other species is complex. The Turians respect them as allies and intelligence partners. The partnership works because both species understand their roles. Turians provide military power. Salarians provide intelligence and technology. Neither tries to be what they're not. The mutual respect runs deep despite philosophical differences about things like honor and rules of engagement. The Asari view Salarians with mixed feelings. On one hand, admiration for their scientific achievements. On the other hand, frustration with Salarian impulsiveness and short-term thinking. Asari matriarchs who've lived 1,000 years find it difficult to relate to Salarians who consider 10 years a long-term plan. The philosophical divide between Asari patience and Salarian urgency creates friction, but it's generally respectful friction. Both species recognize the other's strengths. Humans and Salarians have an interesting dynamic. Both species are relatively new to galactic civilization by Asari standards. Both are aggressive and experimental. Both value results over tradition. There's natural affinity there. But humans are often disturbed by Salarian ethics, the willingness to do terrible things for pragmatic reasons, the lack of romantic relationships, the seeming coldness in how Salarians calculate costs and benefits. Salarians find humans fascinating, emotional, impulsive, making decisions based on feelings rather than logic. But humans also innovate in ways Salarians appreciate. The Alliance proved itself adaptable and resourceful during the First Contact War and the Reaper War. Salarians respect that, even if they don't understand why humans insist on making everything so complicated with romantic relationships and emotional attachments. The Krogan relationship with Salarians is the most damaged. Centuries of genophage-induced suffering created hatred that runs deep. Young Krogan are raised on stories about the Salarian betrayal, how the Salarians uplifted them, used them, then crippled them when they became inconvenient. It's generational trauma, and even if the genophage is cured, even if Krogan reproduction recovers, that historical wound will take generations to heal. Some Krogan, like Urdnot Rex if he survives the trilogy, are capable of pragmatic cooperation with Salarians. Rex understands that holding grudges doesn't help his species survive, that working with former enemies is sometimes necessary. But that's leadership making hard choices. The average Krogan has no such pragmatism. They remember, they resent, and they'll carry that resentment for centuries. The Salarian influence on intelligence gathering and espionage became galactic standard. Every major species maintains intelligence services modeled at least partly on the STG. The techniques, the cell structure, the emphasis on preemptive action. These concepts spread throughout Citadel space because they work, because Salarians proved their effectiveness repeatedly. This created an interesting dynamic. Everyone spies on everyone now. It's expected, accepted as just how government works in civilized space. The Asari have their intelligence services. The Turians have Blackwatch and other organizations. The humans have Alliance intelligence. The Spectres operate as semi-independent agents. Everyone's gathering information on everyone else. And the Salarians who started it all have to accept that they're targets of espionage as much as perpetrators. The STG still has advantages. They've been doing this longer. They're better at it. But the gap has narrowed. Other species learned Salarian techniques and adapted them, created their own innovations. The intelligence game in Citadel space is far more sophisticated now than when the Salarians first joined the galactic community. And that sophistication is partly Salarian legacy. Culturally, the Salarians have influenced the galaxy less than the Asari, or even humans. They don't export their values or lifestyle effectively, partly because their biology is so different. Other species can't live on Salarian timescales, can't think at Salarian speeds, can't adopt Salarian social structures based on clan and imprinting. So Salarian culture remains distinctly Salarian. Fascinating to study, but not easily emulated. But Salarian attitude toward knowledge and problem-solving has spread. The idea that complicated problems can be solved through analysis and clever thinking, that intelligence is the ultimate resource, that understanding how systems work lets you manipulate them effectively. These concepts are taught in universities throughout Citadel space. They're incorporated into military academies and government training programs. The Salarian worldview has become part of the galactic intellectual landscape. The dark side of this legacy is the normalization of manipulation, the acceptance that governments engage in covert
Action as standard policy, that intelligence agencies topple governments and assassinate inconvenient individuals for strategic purposes. These were always part of civilization's darker elements. But the Salarians made them systematic, professional. They turned shadow work into science. And once it's science, it can be taught, refined, and exported to other civilizations. Is the galaxy better or worse for this? That's a question without easy answers. Intelligence agencies prevent wars, but they also violate sovereignty. They save lives through preemptive action, but they also create humanitarian disasters through unintended consequences. The Salarian legacy in this area is morally ambiguous at best. The post-Reaper War galaxy faces new realities. The balance of power has shifted. Some species were devastated more than others. Old alliances held, but new relationships need to be forged. And the Salarians, despite their losses, remain essential to galactic recovery. Because rebuilding requires the same things winning the war required: intelligence, technology, creative problem solving. The Salarians provide all three. The genophage question, depending on player choices, either remains a barrier to Salarian-Krogan relations or becomes an opportunity for healing. If cured, the Krogan remember who helped make that cure possible. Morden's sacrifice, Shepard's support, even some Salarian scientists who defied their Dalatrases to provide research. The path to reconciliation exists. It's difficult. It requires Krogan willing to forgive, and Salarians willing to acknowledge the full weight of what they did. But it's possible. If the genophage continues, the divide remains. The Krogan continue dying. The Salarians continue justifying it with the same arguments they've used for centuries. And the next conflict between the species becomes inevitable. Just a matter of when, not if. That's the darker timeline, the one where nobody learned, where old patterns repeat because changing is too difficult. The Salarians' greatest contribution to galactic civilization might be the example they provide, both positive and negative. They show what intelligence can accomplish, the problems that can be solved, the innovations that can be achieved, the threats that can be neutralized before they explode. They prove that you don't need to be the biggest or strongest to matter, that clever thinking and fast action can substitute for raw power. But they also show the limitations and dangers of that approach, the moral compromises that pure pragmatism leads to, the suffering caused when everything becomes calculation, the unintended consequences that brilliant plans can produce. The Salarians are a cautionary tale, wrapped in an inspirational story. Learn from both aspects. Emulate the strengths. Avoid the pitfalls. In the centuries to come, assuming the galaxy survives and thrives after the Reaper War, the Salarians will continue evolving. They're too adaptable not to. Too intelligent not to learn from experience. The younger generation, the Salarians who fought in the Reaper War, saw what happens when old doctrines fail, when intelligence isn't enough, when cooperation matters more than manipulation. Those lessons will shape Salarian thinking going forward. Perhaps they'll become less interventionist, more willing to share information openly rather than hoarding it for strategic advantage. Perhaps they'll develop greater appreciation for perspectives that don't move at their speed, for wisdom that comes from patience rather than rapid calculation. Perhaps they'll find ways to maintain their effectiveness while being less ethically problematic. Or perhaps not. Perhaps the Salarians will remain what they've always been, fast-thinking pragmatists who do whatever it takes to protect their interests and the broader galactic order as they understand it. Species don't change fundamentally. Biology drives culture, drives behavior. Salarians will always think faster than other species, will always see 10 moves ahead, will always struggle with the temptation to manipulate when they believe they know better than everyone else. The key is whether they can maintain self-awareness about these tendencies, whether they can acknowledge their own limitations and blind spots, whether they can accept that being the smartest doesn't mean being right. That's the growth opportunity for Salarians as a species. Not to become something they're not, but to become a wiser version of what they are. Individual Salarians already demonstrate this capacity. Morden Solace learned, grew, changed his mind about the genophage despite having defended it for years. Captain Kira understood that honor and pragmatism aren't mutually exclusive, that sacrifice can be both logical and heroic. The Salarian scientists who defied their Dalatrases to help cure the genophage chose conscience over orders. These individuals prove that Salarians can balance intelligence with wisdom, can make choices based on more than just calculation. If that individual capacity can become cultural, if the next generation of Salarians can learn from the mistakes of the genophage while maintaining the strengths that make them effective, then the species' future is bright. they'll remain essential to galactic civilization, valued partners rather than feared manipulators, respected for their contributions without being resented for their methods. The Salarian legacy is still being written. 2,000 years is a long time by human standards, but it's just the beginning for a species that will continue shaping the galaxy for millennia to come. Every scientific breakthrough, every threat neutralized before it explodes, every war prevented through intelligence and preemptive action. That's the Salarian contribution. Invisible most of the time, controversial when visible, but undeniably important. Throughout the Mass Effect trilogy, players encounter Salarians who exemplify different aspects of their species. Each one offers insight into what it means to be Salarian, to think fast, to make hard choices, to balance brilliance with the messy realities of a galaxy that doesn't always cooperate with your calculations. Let's examine some of the most significant Salarian characters and what they represent. Mordin Solus is perhaps the most complex Salarian in the entire series. A former STG operative turned doctor, a scientist who helped modify the genophage, then spent years questioning whether that choice was right. A person who sings Gilbert and Sullivan while casually discussing the ethics of biological warfare. Mordin is contradiction personified, and that makes him perfectly Salarian. When Commander Shepard first meets Mordin, he's running a clinic in the slums of Omega, the worst station in the Terminus systems, a place where civilized laws don't apply, where violence is constant and the poor die from preventable diseases. Mordin is there anyway, working himself to exhaustion, treating patients who can't pay, training locals to continue the work when he's gone. It's atonement, though he doesn't frame it that way. It's just logical. He has skills. People need help. Therefore, help them. Mordin talks fast, so fast that his dialogue often drops articles and pronouns. Had to be me. Someone else might have gotten it wrong. It's not poor English, it's efficiency. Why waste syllables on unnecessary words when meaning is clear without them? Every Salarian does this to some degree. But Mordin is extreme even by Salarian standards. His mind moves so quickly that his speech struggles to keep up. His loyalty mission in Mass Effect 2 reveals his history with the genophage modification. Mordin defends it initially. The math is clear. The Krogan were overpopulating. Without the modification, they'd have overcome the original genophage through natural evolution. Another Krogan rebellion would have followed. More death, more destruction. The modifications saved lives. Tragic, yes, but necessary. The math doesn't lie. But then you meet Malon, Mordin's former student, who went to Tuchanka and conducted experiments trying to cure the genophage, using live subjects, female Krogan volunteers who endured horrific procedures, hoping their suffering would lead to a cure. The experiments failed, produced only more pain. And Mordin is confronted with the human, or rather Krogan, cost of his abstract calculations. The choice of whether to save Malon's data becomes critical in Mass Effect 3. Without it,
curing the genophage is much more difficult. With it, the cure is possible, but built on torture. Morden wrestles with this. Pure consequentialism says use the data. Anything that helps is good. But deontological ethics says some means are wrong regardless of ends. Using torture data validates the torture, makes it retroactively worthwhile. Morden's character arc is about learning that the math isn't always enough, that moral intuition matters, that some things can't be reduced to equations. By Mass Effect 3, he's concluded the genophage was a mistake. Not strategically. Strategically, it worked. But morally, the suffering it caused outweighs the lives it saved. And he's willing to die to fix it. Had to be me. It's his responsibility, his mistake to correct, his life to spend making things right. If you convince him not to cure the genophage, if you argue that the Krogan under Reeves' leadership can't be trusted, Morden reluctantly agrees, but it destroys him emotionally. He's compromising his principles for pragmatism, doing what the old Morden would have done, and hating himself for it. The growth he achieved gets reversed. It's one of the darkest outcomes in the trilogy, because it represents personal tragedy as much as species-level harm. Morden represents the best of what Salarians can be. Brilliant but willing to learn. Fast-thinking but capable of reflection. Pragmatic but not heartless. He makes mistakes, big ones, but he owns them. And when he discovers he was wrong, he changes course, even if it costs him everything. That's wisdom. Not just intelligence. Wisdom. Captain Kiri offers a different perspective. He's military rather than scientific, STG Special Forces, and he embodies Salarian military doctrine perfectly. Intelligence-driven operations, sacrifice when necessary, absolute commitment to the mission. But unlike the stereotype of cold Salarian pragmatism, Kiri also demonstrates honor and compassion. On Vermeer, Kiri's regiment is isolated and outnumbered. They've discovered Saren's base, a facility producing an army of indoctrinated soldiers, conducting experiments on the very Salarian scientists the STG came to rescue. The moral thing is to extract, save who you can, report to the council. But that gives Saren time to move his operation, time to produce more soldiers, time to advance whatever scheme he's pursuing. Kiri chooses the mission. His regiment will create a diversion, draw Saren's forces away from the facility, give Commander Shepard a chance to infiltrate and destroy the base. It's near suicide, but it's also the only chance to stop whatever horror Saren is creating. So they do it, and Kiri leads from the front. Hold the line isn't an order he gives from safety. It's a principle he embodies personally. His speech before the assault is studied in military academies, not because it's eloquent by Asari standards or poetic by human ones, but because it's honest. It acknowledges fear, acknowledges that many won't survive, then asks them to do it anyway, because that's what the job requires.
The Salarian approach to motivational speaking. No false promises, just clarity about the stakes and trust in their professionalism. If Kiri survives Vermeer, he continues serving with distinction. In Mass Effect 3, he's promoted to Major, receives the Star of Surkesh, the highest military honor. And he works with Commander Shepard despite political tensions over the genophage, because Kira understands that defeating the Reapers requires setting aside smaller conflicts. That honor means keeping your word, even when politically inconvenient. Kira represents the Salarian capacity for heroism. He thinks fast, plans carefully, but when the situation requires direct action and sacrifice, he doesn't hesitate. He's proof that Salarian pragmatism doesn't mean cowardice, that calculating odds doesn't prevent bravery, that you can be both intelligent and honorable. Dalatras Linron is the darker face of Salarian leadership. She's the most prominent Dalatras players encounter, the leader of one of the most powerful clans, and she embodies Salarian pragmatism taken to its logical extreme. Cold calculation, strategic thinking untempered by compassion, willingness to sacrifice others for Salarian advantage. Linron opposes curing the genophage absolutely. Her reasoning is pure realpolitik. The Krogan, once cured, will outnumber and potentially overpower other species. They'll remember Salarian responsibility for the genophage. They'll seek revenge. Better to keep them weak. Use them as disposable troops against the Reapers if possible, but don't strengthen them. That's creating a future threat to solve a present problem. She tries to bribe Commander Shepard to sabotage the genophage cure, offers Salarian military support, access to advanced technology, resources for the Crucible, whatever it takes to prevent the cure from being dispersed. She's not evil. She genuinely believes she's protecting her species, making the hard choice that others are too sentimental to make. But she's wrong, and her wrongness demonstrates the limitation of pure pragmatism. Linron represents what happens when intelligence operates without wisdom, when calculation replaces ethics. She's brilliant, strategically minded, absolutely committed to Salarian survival, but she can't see beyond the numbers, can't understand that some costs are too high regardless of strategic benefit, can't imagine that trusting the Krogan might be possible. Her thinking is trapped in old patterns, fighting the last war instead of adapting to new realities. If Shepard refuses her bribe and cures the genophage anyway, Linron withdraws some Salarian support. She's true to her word in that regard. But she also proves that individual Dalatrases don't control all Salarians. Kira and others continue cooperating because they've made different calculations, because they understand that defeating the Reapers matters more than clan politics. Linron is a villain in some ways, but a very Salarian villain. Not cruel or sadistic, just ruthlessly logical according to her understanding of Salarian interests. She's wrong,
but she's wrong for reasons that make sense from her perspective. That's more complicated than simple evil, more realistic, more morally troubling. Counselor Valerne is the Salarian representative on the Citadel Council. He's less prominently featured than the Asari and Turian counselors, but he demonstrates Salarian diplomatic approach, measured, information-focused, reluctant to commit to action without clear strategic benefit. Some find him frustrating. Others appreciate his caution. Valerne recognizes the Reaper threat earlier than his colleagues. The Salarians believe Shepard's warnings about the Reapers before the other Council races do. Not because Salarians are more trusting, but because they did their own intelligence gathering. The STG investigated independently, found corroborating evidence, ran probability analyses that suggested Shepard was right. So Valerne supported action, even while officially maintaining Council skepticism. This represents Salarian approach to diplomacy. Trust, but verify. Accept claims that evidence supports. Reject claims that don't pass analytical scrutiny. It makes them reliable partners when convinced, but difficult to convince in the first place. You need to present arguments that stand up to Salarian analysis. Appeal to emotion doesn't work. Appeal to logic might. Valerne and the other counselors become problematic in Mass Effect 2 when they refuse to acknowledge collector activity. The evidence is there, but acknowledging it means accepting that the Reapers might have left agents behind, that the threat isn't over, that resources need to be committed to investigation. The Council, including Valerne, chooses bureaucratic blindness instead. Easier to dismiss reports than deal with implications. This isn't unique to Salarians. All the counselors do it. But it's disappointing from Valerne, because Salarians are supposed to be the ones who face uncomfortable truths, who look at data objectively. The fact that even Salarians fall victim to confirmation bias and political convenience is telling. Intelligence doesn't make you immune to human or Salarian weaknesses. Just more frustrated when you realize you've succumbed to them. Paddock Wicks appears in Mass Effect 3 if Morden died in Mass Effect 2. He's an alternative Salarian scientist who can synthesize the genophage cure. Wicks is brilliant, but nervous. Socially awkward even by Salarian standards. He worked on the original genophage, not the modification. And he's always questioned whether it was right. Wicks doesn't have Morden's certainty or confidence. He second-guesses, worries, needs reassurance, but he's just as committed to curing the genophage. For him, it's about correcting a wrong he participated in decades ago, about finally doing what he always felt was right, but was too cautious to pursue. His nervousness makes his heroism more remarkable. He's terrified, but he does it anyway. If Wicks disperses the cure through the shroud, his final moments mirror Morden's. Riding the elevator up, fixing the sabotage, staying behind when the tower collapses. I made a mistake. A big mistake. I'm going to fix it. It's less poetic than Morden's version, more plainly stated, but equally heroic, equally tragic. Wix proves that courage doesn't require confidence, that doing the right thing matters even when you're not sure of yourself. These Salarians represent different facets of their species. Morden shows growth and moral complexity. Kirish demonstrates honor and bravery. Linron exemplifies pragmatism without wisdom. Valern represents diplomatic caution. Wix embodies uncertainty and courage. Together, they paint a picture of a species that's more complicated than stereotypes suggest. Salarians aren't just fast-talking scientists or cold-blooded manipulators. They're individuals making choices based on their understanding of ethics, duty, and necessity. Sometimes those choices are right. Sometimes they're catastrophically wrong. But they're always interesting. Conclusion: the intelligence paradox. We've journeyed through Salarian history, from their humid jungles of Surkesh to the highest levels of Citadel government, from the uplift of the Krogan to the creation of the Genophage, from the shadows of STG operations to the open warfare of the Reaper conflict. Through it all, one truth remains constant. The Salarians prove that intelligence alone isn't enough, that being the smartest species in the room doesn't guarantee making the right choices. The Salarian story is fundamentally about the paradox of intelligence. The more you know, the more responsibility you bear for your choices. You can't claim ignorance when you've analyzed every variable. Can't say you didn't know when you've got photographic memory and think 10 times faster than everyone else. The Salarians understand this. It's why characters like Morden wrestle so deeply with their choices. Why even pragmatists like Kirish recognize that calculation must sometimes yield to conviction. The Genophage hangs over everything. It's the defining Salarian legacy, proof of their brilliance and their moral blindness. They created a weapon so sophisticated it's still working perfectly 1,000 years after deployment, still accomplishing exactly what it was designed to do. That's extraordinary scientific achievement. But it's also ongoing tragedy. Every stillborn Krogan egg, every female screaming her grief, every clan dying out. That's Salarian responsibility. You can't take credit for the success without accepting blame for the cost. But the Genophage isn't the whole story. The Salarians also helped end the Rachni Wars, built technologies that improved life throughout Citadel space, created intelligence networks that prevented countless conflicts, contributed essential research during the Reaper War. For every dark choice, there's a contribution that genuinely helped. The moral ledger is complicated, as it should be, as it is for any species with power and longevity. The Salarian approach to life, thinking fast and dying young but packing enormous accomplishment into that brief span, offers lessons for everyone. Efficiency matters. Speed has value, but so does reflection. So does considering consequences beyond immediate results. The Salarians excel at the former. They struggle with the latter. Learning that balance is their ongoing challenge. In Commander Shepard, the Salarians found something unexpected. a non-Salarian who could think on their level, who made decisions as quickly as they did, who understood that sometimes the impossible situation requires choosing the least bad option rather than the good one. Shepard's friendship with Salarians like Morden, or cooperation with operators like Kirahi, represents what's possible when intelligence meets wisdom. When fast thinking is tempered by moral consideration. The galaxy after the Reaper War needs Salarians, needs their scientific expertise for rebuilding, needs their intelligence networks to prevent new threats from emerging, needs their willingness to ask difficult questions and pursue uncomfortable truths. But it also needs Salarians to learn, to grow, to become slightly less certain that their calculations are always correct, to accept that other perspectives, even from slower thinking species, might sometimes see truths that pure analysis misses. The future of the Salarians depends on whether they can manage that growth, whether the lessons of the Genophage and the Reaper War sink in deeply enough to change not just individuals, but culture. Whether the next generation of Salarian leaders are more like Morden, willing to admit mistakes and change course, than like Linron, locked into strategic thinking that can't adapt to new realities. It's possible. Individual Salarians prove it's possible. They're not doomed to repeat past mistakes. They're capable of wisdom alongside intelligence, of compassion alongside calculation, of recognizing that the math doesn't always matter as much as the morality. Those capacities exist. The question is whether they can become dominant rather than exceptional. The Salarians gifted the galaxy with incredible innovations, advanced technology, intelligence-driven security, the operational frameworks that make modern galactic civilization function. They also gifted us with cautionary tales about the limitations of pure pragmatism, about what happens when you're too clever for your own good, about the weight of responsibility that comes with being the smartest species around. Both gifts matter. Learn from the successes. Study the failures. Appreciate the complexity. The Salarians aren't simple heroes or villains. They're brilliant, flawed, fascinating people who've shaped 2 millennia of galactic history by thinking faster and working harder than almost anyone else. They'll continue shaping that history for millennia to come. And the galaxy will be richer for their contributions, even while wrestling with the costs of those same contributions. If you've made it this far into our deep dive, thank you for joining me on this exploration of the Salarians. These amphibian scientists who proved you don't need the longest lifespan or the biggest military to matter. You just need to be smart enough to see opportunities others miss, fast enough to exploit them before the moment passes, and hopefully wise enough to consider whether you should just because you can. Before you drift off to sleep tonight, consider the Salarian philosophy. A war should be won before it begins. Information is the ultimate weapon. Intelligence is the path to power. But also remember Morden's final lesson. Had to be me. Someone else might have gotten it wrong. Sometimes wisdom means recognizing that the equation isn't complete, that the variables include things you can't measure, that being right isn't the same as doing right. The Salarians are still learning that lesson, still growing, still evolving, just like the rest of us. And if a species that thinks 10 times faster than humans can still be learning wisdom after 2,000 years, maybe there's hope for all of us. Maybe intelligence is just the starting point, and wisdom is what we spend our lives pursuing, regardless of how fast we think or how long we live. Sweet dreams, and may your own choices be guided by both intelligence and wisdom, by calculation and compassion, by the understanding that being smart is valuable, but being good is essential. The Salarians are still working on that balance, but they're trying. And sometimes, trying is enough to make a difference. One fast thought at a time. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Salarian culture, history, and philosophy, consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. It really helps us continue making these long-form explorations of science fiction's most fascinating civilizations. And if there's another species or topic from Mass Effect or any other sci-fi universe you'd like us to cover, leave a comment. We read them all, and we're always looking for the next deep dive to explore together. Until next time, sleep well, dream of humid jungles and fast thoughts, of intelligence wielded with wisdom and courage balanced with calculation. And remember that in a galaxy of wonders and horrors, sometimes the most fascinating species are the ones who prove that being brilliant doesn't mean having all the answers, just means you understand the questions better than most. Good night.